You've been trying to control the outcome of everything, your plans, your relationships, your future, believing that if you just hold on tighter, nothing will fall apart. But if control really worked, why does life still surprise you? Why do things still slip through your fingers no matter how carefully you prepare? Why does the more you try to force peace, the further it seems to move away? The truth is, life was never something you were meant to control. It was something you were meant to experience. And Buddhist wisdom has revealed this for centuries. Not through struggle, not through pressure, but through surrender. The quiet strength of letting go of what was never yours to command. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you will begin to release. The need to predict, to manage, to hold everything together. Your mind will soften. The tension in your chest will ease. And you will feel a strange calm, as if the river of life is finally allowed to carry you instead of you fighting the current. This is not about losing control. It is about discovering peace without needing it. Are you ready to stop forcing life and start flowing with it? Let's begin. Something shifts the moment you stop fighting what cannot be forced. The tight grip begins to loosen, and in that quiet space, a deeper question rises. If control was never truly yours, then what has been carrying your life all along? A strange relief appears when you realize you were never holding the river together. It was already flowing before you arrived, and it will keep flowing long after you let go. There is a silent exhaustion that comes from trying to manage everything, planning every possibility, preparing for conversations that haven't happened, replaying moments that are already gone. It feels responsible, even necessary, yet it slowly drains the energy meant for living. Many people spend years believing that vigilance will protect them from pain, not realizing that the vigilance itself becomes the pain. Life does not move like a machine waiting for instructions. It moves like water, unpredictable, alive, constantly reshaping its path. You can build walls, redirect streams, try to trap it in containers, but eventually it finds another way. Not because it is against you, but because movement is its nature. From the moment you were born, events began unfolding without your approval. The family you entered, the place you grew up, the timing of opportunities and losses, none of these waited for your permission slip. Even now your heart beats without asking you first. Your lungs fill and empty on their own. The sun rises whether you feel ready or not. There is already an intelligence guiding life that operates beyond personal control. When people try to steer everything, it often comes from fear disguised as responsibility. Fear of loss, fear of uncertainty, fear of being hurt again. Control becomes a shield that promises safety. But shields are heavy, and carrying them all the time leaves no hands free to receive anything new. There is a quiet tragedy in missing the present moment because your attention is locked on what might happen next. A conversation with a loved one passes by while your mind is calculating future scenarios. A beautiful afternoon fades unnoticed because you are rehearsing possible problems. Control steals the only time that is actually real, now. Buddhist teachings speak gently about this, not as a command, but as an invitation. They point out that suffering often comes from resisting the flow of reality, not from pain itself, but from the insistence that life should be different than it is. When you argue with reality, you fight a battle that cannot be won, and the exhaustion that follows feels personal, even though it isn't. Think of how many times you tried to force an outcome, only to discover that the result came from somewhere else entirely. Relationships that ended despite your effort to hold them together. Opportunities that appeared when you had stopped searching. Solutions that arrived the moment you surrendered the need to solve everything immediately. These moments reveal something important. Life responds to participation, not domination. The illusion of steering comes from mistaking influence for control. You can guide your actions, choose your responses, plant seeds of intention, but you cannot command the weather that determines how those seeds grow. You cannot force other people's hearts to move in a certain direction. You cannot freeze time at the moment you feel safest. There is also a quiet arrogance hidden inside the need to control everything, though it rarely feels like arrogance. It feels like survival. Yet it assumes that the mind can predict a future shaped by millions of invisible variables. Every person you will meet, every decision they will make, every event unfolding across the world, all interacting in ways too complex to track. Trying to control outcomes in such a system is like trying to direct the path of the wind with your hands. Letting go does not mean becoming passive or careless. It means understanding the difference between effort and attachment. You can act with full sincerity, give your best energy, speak your truth, and still release the demand that life must respond in a specific way. This is the paradox that creates peace, doing without gripping. When you stop trying to steer the entire river, you begin to feel the current supporting you. Decisions become clearer because they are not clouded by panic. Conversations become more honest because you are not trying to manipulate reactions. Even failures soften because they are seen as turns in the river, not evidence that you are lost. There is a kind of freedom in admitting that you do not know how everything will unfold. It removes the pressure to perform certainty. It allows curiosity to replace fear. Instead of bracing for impact, you start observing the movement of life with interest. What once felt threatening begins to feel mysterious in a peaceful way. Many people discover too late that control kept them from fully living. They postponed joy until conditions were perfect. They delayed risks until guarantees appeared. They waited for a future that never stabilized enough to feel safe. In trying to secure life, they accidentally postponed it. Nature offers quiet lessons about this everywhere. Trees do not resist the changing seasons. Rivers do not mourn the shape they had yesterday. Clouds do not cling to the sky once the wind begins to move them. There is a natural intelligence in allowing transformation, even when it looks like loss. Human beings, gifted with memory and imagination, often struggle more because they can replay the past and rehearse the future endlessly. This mental time travel creates the illusion that everything can be prepared for. But preparation cannot replace presence. Life is experienced forward, one moment at a time, not solved like a puzzle before it happens. When you release the illusion of steering, something unexpected happens. Gratitude becomes easier. Not forced gratitude, but the kind that arises when you see how much has been carrying you without your awareness. The people who showed up at the right time, the strength that appeared during hardship, the quiet resilience that kept you moving even when you felt lost. You start to notice that control was never protecting you from pain anyway. Difficult moments arrived regardless. The difference now is that you are not adding extra suffering by resisting them. Pain moves through you instead of becoming stuck inside a story about how things should have been different. Trust begins to grow, not as blind optimism, but as a grounded confidence that you can meet whatever comes. You realize that you have survived uncertainty before. You have adapted to changes you once feared. The river has carried you through rapids and calm waters alike, even when you doubted it. This trust changes how you relate to time. Urgency softens. You stop treating every decision as if it will determine your entire future. You allow space for life to unfold instead of demanding immediate answers. Sometimes clarity arrives not through effort, but through waiting. Relationships also transform when you stop trying to control outcomes. You listen more because you are not steering conversations toward a predetermined conclusion. You respect other people's paths instead of trying to manage them. Love becomes less about possession and more about presence. There is a quiet dignity in moving with life rather than against it. It does not make you weak, it makes you adaptable. Like water, you learn to change shape without losing essence. You discover strength in flexibility instead of rigidity. Moments of uncertainty still come, but they feel different now. Instead of panic, there is curiosity. Instead of resistance, there is openness. You may not know where the river is leading, but you begin to trust that movement itself is part of the destination. Peace, then, is not found by controlling every outcome. It is found by releasing the demand that outcomes must obey you. It is found in participating fully while allowing life to respond in its own timing. As this understanding settles, the need to hold everything together slowly dissolves. You realize that the river never asked you to steer it. It only asked you to be present for the journey. And in that realization, something inside you rests for the first time in a long while. As the river keeps moving, a quieter truth starts to sink in. The problem was never the current. The problem was the grip, the tightening, the constant internal command that life must go a certain way for peace to be allowed. And once that illusion of steering begins to fade, something else becomes clear too. Forcing doesn't just fail sometimes. It often punishes the one doing it. There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't come from what happened, but from how hard the mind tried to prevent it. A private suffering that grows in the space between reality and the result you demanded. It doesn't always show up as obvious sadness. Sometimes it appears as irritability, as restlessness, as tension in the jaw, as waking up tired even after sleeping, as that subtle feeling of being chased by life even when nothing is happening. Something has been happening under the surface. Because forcing backfires in a way most people don't notice at first. It doesn't always break the situation. It breaks the inside. The moment attachment is born, hidden suffering begins. A quiet curiosity rises here, and it matters. How can a person do everything right and still suffer? How can effort become a trap? How can wanting a good outcome create pain before anything even goes wrong? Attachment to results is not just hope. It is a contract, a mental agreement that says, I will only feel okay if life gives me this. And once that contract is signed, the mind becomes a collector. It starts monitoring, measuring, comparing. It treats every day like a courtroom where reality is constantly on trial. And the strange part is, the suffering often begins long before the outcome arrives. The first hidden cost of attachment is that it turns the present into a waiting room. Life becomes something you endure until the real moment happens. The job title, the relationship, the apology, the breakthrough, the money, the healing, the recognition, and while waiting, the mind keeps whispering, not yet, not enough, almost, soon. Even peaceful moments start to feel incomplete because they aren't serving the outcome. This is how the mind steals joy without ever announcing the theft. Attachment also creates a new kind of fear, not fear of the world, but fear of losing the result you're chasing. When a person becomes attached, even progress becomes stressful. A relationship starts going well, and instead of enjoying it, the mind begins scanning for signs it might collapse. A project starts growing, and instead of gratitude, the mind becomes terrified of losing momentum. Success becomes a fragile glass, and the mind walks around it holding its breath. This is the backfire. What was supposed to bring peace becomes the source of anxiety. Another hidden suffering is how attachment corrupts effort. There is a clean kind of effort, honest, steady, rooted in the present. And then there is desperate effort. Effort fueled by fear, urgency, and the need to control. Desperate effort feels like pushing a locked door harder instead of checking whether it opens the other way. It burns energy quickly, and because it is tense, it becomes less intelligent. This is why forcing often creates the very outcome you feared. A person who is attached to being loved can become clingy. That clinginess creates pressure. The pressure pushes the other person away, and then the attached person feels proven right that love is unsafe. But what really happened is that the attachment shaped the behavior, and the behavior shaped the outcome. A person attached to being respected can over-explain. They can argue, they can push for validation, and that chasing behavior reduces respect. Not because the person is bad, but because energy reads desperation as weakness. The more the person tries to control the image, the more unstable it becomes. A person attached to being seen as competent can become defensive. They can avoid mistakes, they can hide questions, they can overwork, and eventually, the stress makes them less competent. The attachment poisons the very thing it wants to protect. This is why Buddhism speaks about clinging as suffering, not because goals are wrong, not because effort is bad, but because clinging turns life into a threat. It turns uncertainty into an enemy. It makes the mind treat outcomes like oxygen. And when the mind believes something is oxygen, it panics at the smallest delay. One of the most painful forms of hidden suffering is conditional worth. When a person becomes attached to results, they begin to attach their identity to them. It stops being, I want to succeed, and becomes, if I don't succeed, I am nothing. It stops being, I want love, and becomes, if I'm not chosen, I'm unlovable. It stops being, I want progress, and becomes, if I fall back, I'm broken. This is not motivation. This is self-punishment wearing a motivational mask. And it's exhausting, because now every outcome is personal. Every delay is interpreted as rejection. Every obstacle feels like a verdict on your life. Even small things feel heavy. A message not replied to becomes a storm. A plan changing becomes an insult. A bad day becomes a story about a bad life. Attachment makes reality emotionally expensive. It also makes people lose their inner flexibility. When you're attached to one outcome, you stop seeing other doors. You stop noticing other paths. You become so focused on one destination that you miss the quiet opportunities passing by. The mind becomes narrow, and narrow minds suffer because they can't adjust. A tree survives storms because it bends. A rigid branch snaps. In the same way, the mind that clings becomes brittle. When life changes, it breaks. Another way forcing backfires is that it teaches you to disrespect timing. There is timing in everything, not the kind you can control, but the kind you can learn to cooperate with. Growth has seasons, relationships have rhythms, healing has waves, learning has plateaus. Attachment hates plateaus. It thinks stillness means failure, so it forces movement, even when the soul needs rest. It forces conversations, even when silence would heal. It forces decisions, even when clarity needs time. Then the person ends up exhausted, confused, and resentful, not because life is cruel, but because they tried to harvest fruit before the tree was ready. When you force, you also lose sensitivity. You stop listening to the quiet signals. The body says, slow down, but attachment says, not now. The heart says, this doesn't feel right, but attachment says, keep going. The outcome is close. The intuition says, let it be, but attachment says, fight harder. This is how people walk into pain with open eyes. And still the mind will say, I had no choice. But there was always a choice. It just didn't feel safe because the mind was addicted to the result. This is an important word, addiction. Attachment to results can behave like an addiction because it creates emotional dependency. The mind starts needing the outcome to regulate itself. If progress happens, the mind feels relief. If progress doesn't happen, the mind panics. This is a fragile way to live, because life is not stable enough to hold your emotional balance for you. Buddhist surrender is not about becoming careless. It is about rebuilding emotional stability inside yourself, so outcomes are no longer the controller of your peace. Because peace that depends on outcomes is not peace. It is a pause between storms. Real peace is what remains even when outcomes change. So what does it look like to release attachment without losing ambition, without becoming passive, without pretending you don't care? It begins with a simple shift, returning effort to the present moment. Instead of obsessing over results, focus on right action. Right action means doing what is wise now, not what guarantees the future. It means speaking honestly without trying to control how it lands. It means showing up consistently without demanding instant reward. It means improving daily without needing applause. When you practice this, your mind slowly learns a new trust. I can act fully, and I can let go fully. This creates a clean feeling in the chest, a steadiness, a lighter relationship with life. Another practice is learning to notice the emotional tightening. Attachment has a physical signature. You can feel it. It often shows up as tension, a contracted stomach, a clenched jaw, a shallow breath, a restless need to check, to confirm, to control. When you notice that tightening, it is a signal, not a command, a signal that says, the mind has started believing peace is outside. The moment you notice it, you can soften it, not by forcing softness, but by allowing, by exhaling, by relaxing the body, by reminding yourself, I can survive uncertainty, by letting the nervous system learn that not everything needs to be solved right now. This is how surrender becomes real, not as an idea, but as a bodily release. There is also the practice of accepting that outcomes are not always proof of your worth. Sometimes you do everything right and life still says no, not as punishment, but as redirection, not as rejection, but as protection, not as failure, but as timing. This is hard to accept when the mind is attached, because attachment assumes it knows what is best. It assumes this outcome is happiness. But life often reveals later that outcome would have broken you. Many people can look back and see it clearly. The relationship they begged for that would have destroyed their peace. The opportunity they chased that would have trapped them. The door that closed that felt cruel in the moment, but saved them from a future they weren't ready for. Attachment cannot see this. It only sees now. Surrender sees beyond now, even when it doesn't know the full picture. A powerful part of surrender is allowing life to be larger than your mind. The mind is useful, but it is not all-knowing. It is a small flashlight, not the sun. It lights a few steps ahead, and then it panics about the darkness beyond. Surrender is trusting that the path continues even when your flashlight cannot see it. This brings you back to the river. If you stand at the edge of a river and try to control it with anger, it will not obey. If you try to control it with fear, it will not soften. If you try to control it with force, you will only exhaust yourself. But if you learn the river, if you study its movement, respect its strength, and cooperate with its flow, you can travel far without breaking yourself. This is the Buddhist approach to life. Not domination, harmony, not obsession with results, presence in action, not clinging, trust. And the hidden suffering begins to dissolve when you stop making outcomes the manager of your happiness. Because the deepest relief is not getting what you want. The deepest relief is no longer needing life to go a certain way to be okay. When that happens, effort becomes lighter, love becomes freer, plans become tools instead of chains, and even uncertainty becomes less threatening because it is no longer treated like a disaster. It becomes a teacher. And right here, in this moment, there is a gentle question that changes everything. What if peace is available now, not after the outcome? When that question enters the mind, the grip loosens again, and the river keeps moving, but this time you are not fighting it. You are finally learning how to float. As the struggle to force outcomes begins to fade, another discomfort quietly surfaces. The ache of things that never concluded. Not everything in life wraps itself neatly. Some conversations end mid-sentence. Some relationships dissolve without a final explanation. Some dreams pause in a place that has no clear name. And once you stop exhausting yourself trying to control what happens, you are left standing in front of something even more unsettling, the unfinished. There is a particular kind of silence that follows when closure never comes. It lingers longer than noise. It follows you into ordinary moments. It shows up when you least expect it, like a book left open on a table that no one returns to finish. Somewhere inside, a quiet question begins to form. Can peace exist without resolution? A strange tenderness lives in the spaces where stories stop without warning. Most people spend years trying to rewrite those endings in their minds, replaying scenes, inventing explanations, constructing imaginary conclusions that might finally let them rest. The mind does this because uncertainty feels like danger. It prefers a painful answer over no answer at all. At least pain has edges. The unfinished has none. Yet life is filled with things that never reach a satisfying final chapter. Friendships fade without conflict. Opportunities disappear without explanation. Apologies never arrive. People change direction without informing the ones left behind. Even parts of yourself, old ambitions, former identities, plans you once believed in, quietly fall away without ceremony. No official ending, no closing speech, just absence where something used to be. The difficulty is not only that these endings are unclear, but that they challenge the belief that life should make sense. From a young age, many people are taught to expect completion. Stories in books resolve, movies provide closure, questions receive answers, effort produces reward, but real life often leaves threads loose, as if it were written by a hand that values movement more than neat conclusions. The mind resists this. It searches for missing pieces, as if solving a puzzle will restore control. It wonders what could have been said differently, done earlier, understood sooner. It reconstructs the past repeatedly, hoping a new angle will produce an ending that never existed. This is where hidden suffering lives, not in the event itself, but in the refusal to accept that the event will remain incomplete. Buddhist wisdom speaks gently here, pointing toward a truth that feels uncomfortable at first. Closure is not something life always gives. Sometimes closure is something you grow into, not through answers, but through acceptance of not knowing. When you stop demanding a conclusion, you begin to see that unfinished stories still shaped you. A relationship that ended without explanation may have taught you tenderness, boundaries, or resilience. A dream that dissolved may have redirected you toward a path you would never have chosen deliberately. Even unanswered questions can deepen compassion because they reveal how fragile certainty really is. The peace found in unfinished stories is not dramatic. It arrives quietly, like the settling of dust after movement stops. It is the realization that life continues even when understanding does not. It is the moment you notice that you are breathing normally again, even though the answer never came. There is also freedom in releasing the need to tie every experience into a clear narrative. When you stop insisting that everything must make sense, you become more present. You start to value moments for what they are, not for the role they play in a future explanation. Conversations become meaningful even if they lead nowhere. Efforts become worthwhile even if they don't produce visible results. Love becomes precious even if it does not last forever. This shift softens the heart. Many people fear unfinished stories because they believe they represent failure or rejection, but incompletion is not always loss. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes it is redirection. Sometimes it is simply the natural ending of something that fulfilled its purpose without needing a formal goodbye. Think of how seasons change. Summer does not apologize when it ends. Autumn does not explain itself. Winter does not justify its arrival. Each season completes what it was meant to do and then steps aside. No announcement, no explanation, just transition. Human life moves in similar cycles, though the mind resists seeing it that way. It clings to permanence because impermanence feels like instability. Yet impermanence is also what allows renewal. If nothing ended, nothing new could begin. Accepting outcomes that never arrive requires a different kind of strength than achieving goals. It requires patience with ambiguity. It requires trust that meaning can exist without clarity. It requires humility to admit that not everything revolves around your need for understanding. One of the deepest forms of maturity is the ability to carry unanswered questions without letting them poison your peace. There is a story often told in Buddhist circles about a monk who asked his teacher to explain the ultimate truth of existence. The teacher remained silent. Days passed, weeks passed. The monk became frustrated, believing he was being ignored. Eventually, he realized that the silence itself was the answer. Not everything can be explained through words. Some truths are meant to be experienced rather than concluded. In the same way, unfinished stories teach through absence. They invite you to grow beyond the need for certainty. They encourage you to build peace that does not depend on tidy endings. Another hidden gift of incompletion is that it reveals your capacity to continue loving without possession. You can care about someone even if they are no longer part of your life. You can appreciate what once existed without needing it to return. You can honor memories without trying to resurrect them. This is not detachment born from indifference. It is detachment born from wisdom. There is also a quiet relief in no longer waiting. Waiting keeps you suspended between past and future. It prevents you from fully entering the present. When you accept that an outcome will not arrive, time begins moving again. Energy returns. Attention shifts toward what is actually here instead of what might have been. People often underestimate how much of their life is spent waiting for things that are no longer coming. Peace grows when waiting ends. This does not mean forgetting. It means allowing memories to exist without demanding action from them. You can remember without reopening wounds. You can reflect without trying to repair something that has already dissolved. Forgiveness often plays a role here, but not always in the way people expect. Forgiveness is not declaring that everything was acceptable. It is releasing yourself from the burden of carrying the unfinished story forward. It is choosing not to let the absence of closure define your future. You forgive so that your life can move again, not so that the past becomes different. Sometimes the hardest unfinished stories involve your own expectations. The life you thought you would live, the person you believed you would become, the timeline you imagined. Letting go of these can feel like losing a part of your identity, yet it also creates space for discovering who you are without the pressure of those expectations. Life often becomes richer when it is no longer compared to an imaginary version. There is a quiet beauty in accepting that not every chapter will be explained. It makes you gentler with yourself and others. It reduces the urgency to judge. It opens the possibility that everyone is carrying unfinished stories you cannot see. This awareness deepens compassion. And as compassion grows, the need for answers softens. You realize that understanding every detail is not necessary for living well. Presence becomes more valuable than explanation. Connection becomes more important than resolution. In this space, peace feels less like a victory and more like a return to the simple fact that life is happening now, not in the version of the story you wished had unfolded. You begin to trust that meaning is not only found at the end of things, it exists throughout the journey, even when the destination remains unclear. And something unexpected happens. Unfinished stories stop feeling like open wounds and start feeling like quiet teachers. They teach patience. They teach humility. They teach the art of letting life remain mysterious without trying to solve it. As this understanding settles, the need to chase closure fades. You stop asking life to rewrite the past. You stop negotiating with what already happened. You stop searching for missing pieces in places that no longer exist. Instead, you carry forward the lessons, the growth, the strength you gained simply by living through it. The story may be unfinished, but you are not. And that is where peace quietly takes root. As peace begins to grow around the things that never concluded, another layer of truth quietly reveals itself. Many of the unfinished stories hurt so deeply, not because they lacked closure, but because they exposed something the mind had been hiding: fear. Not the loud kind that announces danger, but the quiet kind that disguises itself as responsibility, preparation, and constant vigilance. When the need for answers loosens, you start to notice how much energy was spent trying to prevent uncertainty from touching you at all. There is a subtle tension that lives beneath the surface of everyday life. It shows up in overthinking, in the need to double-check everything, in the restless scanning for what might go wrong next. It looks like discipline. It sounds like wisdom. But underneath, it often comes from a deeper unease that never fully relaxes. A quiet question appears here. What if control was never strength, but fear wearing a uniform? There is a kind of planning that feels calm and grounded. It prepares without panic. It adjusts when necessary. It leaves space for the unknown. But there is another kind that feels urgent, tight, and endless. It runs in circles, trying to predict every possible outcome, every possible reaction, every possible mistake before it happens. This second kind is not really planning. It is anxiety trying to create safety by building walls out of thoughts. The body knows the difference even when the mind pretends not to. Real preparation feels steady. Anxious control feels exhausting. After hours of mental rehearsing, nothing has actually changed in the outside world, yet the inside feels drained, as if something heavy has been carried for miles. Fear often hides because admitting fear feels like weakness, so it changes its language. It calls itself caution. It calls itself responsibility. It calls itself being realistic. And while some caution is wise, fear-driven control goes further. It assumes danger is everywhere and peace must be earned through constant monitoring. This is why people who try to control everything rarely feel safe, even when nothing is wrong. An anxious mind treats uncertainty as a threat instead of a natural part of life. It believes that if it just thinks hard enough, plans thoroughly enough, anticipates precisely enough, it can eliminate surprises. But life is not a system that can be fully mapped. It is alive, shifting, influenced by countless factors beyond personal awareness. Trying to control it all is like trying to freeze the wind. Fear also creates the illusion that you are alone in managing existence. It whispers that if you stop planning for a moment, everything will collapse. It convinces you that rest is dangerous, that relaxation is careless, that letting go means losing everything you care about. So the mind stays alert, even when the body begs for peace. Over time, this constant alertness becomes normal. You forget what true calm feels like. You forget that it is possible to sit without scanning for problems. You forget that not every silence is hiding a crisis. This is one of the hidden costs of control. It trains the nervous system to live in a state of subtle alarm. Many people discover this only when their bodies begin to protest. Tight shoulders, shallow breathing, difficulty sleeping, racing thoughts that refuse to quiet down even when the day is over. These are not random discomforts. They are signals that the system has been pushed beyond its natural rhythm. Fear-driven control also interferes with trust, not only trust in others, but trust in life itself. When you are constantly planning for worst-case scenarios, you stop noticing how often things actually work out. You overlook the support that appears unexpectedly. You miss the resilience you already carry. Instead of seeing evidence of safety, the mind becomes addicted to searching for evidence of danger. This addiction is powerful because it feels protective. It says, if I stay worried, I won't be caught off guard. But worry does not prevent pain. It only rehearses it. It creates suffering in advance for events that may never happen. Buddhist teachings describe this as living in imagined futures instead of the present moment. The mind projects possibilities and then reacts to them as if they are real. The body responds with stress hormones. The heart rate changes, muscles tighten, all because of something that exists only as a thought. Recognizing this pattern is the beginning of freedom. When you start to see that control is often fear in disguise, you stop blaming yourself for not being calm enough. You begin to understand that your system was trying to protect you in the only way it knew. This recognition softens self-judgment. Instead of fighting your anxiety, you learn to listen to it without obeying it. Fear does not disappear through force. It settles when it feels understood. Another important realization is that uncertainty has never actually prevented life from continuing. Every major change you have lived through came with unknowns. You did not have full information. You did not have guarantees. Yet somehow you adapted, you learned, you found new strength you didn't know you had. Remembering this weakens the belief that control is necessary for survival. There is also a difference between influence and control that becomes clearer here. You can influence your actions, your habits, your responses. You can choose kindness, patience, honesty. but you cannot control how others interpret you, how circumstances evolve, or how time reshapes everything. Trying to control what belongs to the wider flow of life creates frustration because it asks the impossible. Letting go of fear-driven control does not mean becoming careless. It means rediscovering trust in your ability to respond instead of your ability to predict. Response happens in the present. Prediction lives in imagined futures. When you rely on response, you stay flexible. When you rely on prediction, you become rigid. Flexibility is what allows you to move with life instead of against it. There is a quiet courage in admitting, "I don't know what will happen, but I will meet it when it comes." This is not weakness, it is resilience. It acknowledges uncertainty without surrendering your strength. As fear loosens, planning itself changes character. It becomes lighter, more practical, less emotional. You prepare for what is reasonable and release what is beyond reach. You stop rehearsing conversations repeatedly. You stop replaying possible disasters. You allow space for spontaneity. Life begins to feel less like a battlefield and more like a landscape you can walk through. Relationships also benefit when control relaxes. Fear-driven planning often tries to manage other people's reactions, predict their moods, anticipate their needs before they speak. While this can come from love, it can also erase authenticity. When you stop controlling interactions, you allow others to be real, not just predictable. Connection deepens when people are allowed to surprise you. There is also relief in no longer carrying the responsibility of holding everything together. You realize that the world does not collapse when you rest. Problems do not multiply because you stopped worrying for an hour. Life continues, breathing on its own. This realization brings humility and peace at the same time. Buddhist surrender encourages a different posture toward existence, one of participation instead of domination. You act where action is needed. You accept where acceptance is wiser. You listen more than you command. You observe more than you interfere. From this place, fear loses its disguise. It becomes visible, and what is visible can be softened. You learn small practices that return you to the present, feeling your breath, noticing the ground beneath your feet, paying attention to sounds without labeling them. These simple acts remind the mind that safety exists now, not just in imagined futures. Gradually, the nervous system relearns how to rest, and as rest returns, clarity follows. Decisions become easier because they are not clouded by panic. Creativity returns because energy is no longer spent on endless forecasting. Joy appears in simple moments because attention is no longer trapped in tomorrow. You begin to experience life directly, again. The greatest shift happens when you realize that fear never truly wanted control. It wanted reassurance. It wanted to know that you would be okay no matter what. And the reassurance comes not from perfect plans, but from recognizing your capacity to endure, adapt, and continue. You have already survived uncertainty. You have already navigated loss, change, confusion. This evidence is stronger than any prediction. Control loses its appeal when you trust yourself. In that trust, something quiet opens, a willingness to live without constant defense. A readiness to experience life as it unfolds, rather than as it is calculated. A sense that peace is not found at the end of perfect planning, but in the middle of honest living. Fear may still visit, but it no longer runs the house. And as this understanding settles, you notice a softness in your days, less urgency, less pressure, more space between thoughts, more patience with yourself and others. The world has not become safer, but you have become calmer within it. This calm is not fragile because it is not based on control. It is rooted in acceptance of what cannot be controlled and confidence in what can. From here, surrender no longer feels like loss. It feels like returning something heavy you were never meant to carry. And in that return, the heart finally learns how to rest without scanning the horizon for the next storm. As the need to control begins to loosen and fear stops disguising itself as constant planning, another hidden tension reveals itself, the exhausting effort to manage how others see you. Even after learning to release outcomes and uncertainty, many people still carry one last burden, the need to be understood exactly as they are by everyone, all the time. And when that understanding doesn't come, the mind rushes to fix it, explain it, defend it, correct it. There is a quiet fatigue that comes from trying to edit your own image in other people's minds. A subtle ache appears here. What if peace doesn't require being understood? There is something deeply human about wanting to be seen correctly, to feel known without distortion, to believe that your intentions, your effort, your heart will be recognized. But life does not guarantee this kind of clarity. Every person looks through their own lens, shaped by their past, their fears, their expectations. Even when you speak carefully, something different may still be heard. Even when you act sincerely, something else may still be assumed. Misunderstanding is not always a failure of communication. Sometimes it is simply the limit of perspective. When you try to control how others perceive you, you enter a maze with no exit. You begin adjusting your words constantly, rehearsing explanations, replaying conversations afterwards, searching for mistakes. You monitor expressions, tones, pauses, wondering what they meant. You carry invisible scripts in your head, preparing for situations that might never happen. Over time, this becomes a second job, managing impressions instead of living. The suffering here is subtle because it looks like kindness or maturity. It appears as patience, diplomacy, emotional intelligence. But underneath, there can be anxiety, the fear that if you are misunderstood, you will be rejected, judged, or abandoned. This fear often begins early. Many people learn that acceptance depends on being interpreted correctly. They learn to explain themselves before anyone asks. They learn to smooth tension before it escalates. They learn to over-clarify so nothing can be twisted. These strategies can be useful in difficult environments, but they become heavy when carried into every relationship. Not every misunderstanding is dangerous. Sometimes letting someone misunderstand you is the only way to remain peaceful. Buddhist wisdom points toward a radical idea. Your inner state does not need universal approval to be valid. You do not need everyone to see you accurately for you to live truthfully. When you release the need to be seen correctly, you stop handing your peace to other people's interpretations. You reclaim something that was always yours, your own clarity. One of the hardest lessons is accepting that some people are committed to misunderstanding you because it fits their story. If they see you as selfish, they will filter your kindness through suspicion. If they see you as weak, they will interpret gentleness as incapacity. If they see you as difficult, even your silence may be labeled as resistance. Trying to correct these narratives can become endless. There is freedom in realizing that not every opinion needs to be corrected. Not every assumption needs to be challenged. Not every false story needs your participation. Silence, in some situations, is not surrender. It is dignity. When you stop chasing validation, something interesting happens. Your energy returns. The hours spent explaining, clarifying, defending, and proving yourself become available again. You can use that energy to build your life instead of maintaining an image. This shift changes relationships too. People who truly care about you will seek understanding without needing constant reassurance. They will ask instead of assume. They will listen instead of project. And those who are not willing to do this reveal themselves naturally, without confrontation. Misunderstanding becomes a filter instead of a threat. Another hidden freedom is authenticity. When you are not busy managing perceptions, you can speak more honestly. You can express uncertainty without dressing it up as certainty. You can change your mind without fearing accusations of inconsistency. You can grow without announcing every step to make sure it is approved. You become less performative and more real. This authenticity feels lighter because it does not rely on perfect interpretation. You say what you mean, act according to your values, and allow the rest to unfold. Some will understand, some won't. Your responsibility ends at sincerity, not at controlling reactions. There is also peace in accepting that you may never fully understand how others see you, and that this is okay. People carry histories you cannot see. They respond from wounds you did not create. They project fears that have nothing to do with you. When you stop personalizing every misunderstanding, compassion becomes easier. You recognize that others are navigating their own inner landscapes, just as you are. Letting people misunderstand you does not mean tolerating disrespect or abuse. Boundaries still matter. But boundaries can be set without lengthy justification. A simple no does not require a detailed defense. Walking away from harmful dynamics does not require convincing the other person that your decision is valid. Sometimes the most powerful explanation is a quiet departure. This lesson is especially important for those who are sensitive or deeply reflective. Such people often carry an extra burden of wanting harmony. They try to prevent conflict by being perfectly clear, perfectly gentle, perfectly reasonable. But harmony cannot be forced. It requires mutual willingness. You cannot create understanding alone. Releasing the need to be seen correctly also frees creativity. When you are not afraid of misinterpretation, you take more risks. You express ideas without filtering them through imagined criticism. You allow yourself to explore without needing everyone to approve the direction. Life becomes less restricted by invisible audiences. There is a deeper spiritual aspect too. When you stop identifying with others' perceptions, you begin to discover who you are beyond roles and labels. You are no longer the person they praised or the person they criticized. You become the quiet awareness observing it all. This awareness is stable because it is not built on reputation. Many people spend decades trying to control how they are remembered, how they are described, how they fit into others' narratives. But narratives change. Stories shift depending on who is telling them. If your identity depends on those stories, it will feel unstable. Peace grows when identity rests in something deeper than opinion. You also learn to appreciate the rare gift of being truly understood by a few people rather than superficially approved by many. Deep understanding is not loud. It does not require performance. It feels like being able to breathe normally in someone's presence. Quality replaces quantity in connection. There is also relief in no longer anticipating criticism before it happens. When you stop preparing defenses, conversations feel lighter. You listen more because you are not composing responses in your head. You speak more naturally because you are not editing every sentence for safety. Presence replaces vigilance. This freedom changes how you relate to mistakes too. Instead of rushing to explain yourself after every misstep, you allow space for reflection. You correct what needs correcting without self-punishment. You accept that imperfection is part of being human, not a flaw to be hidden. Growth becomes possible when defensiveness softens. Over time, the need to be seen correctly dissolves into something gentler, the wish to live truthfully. You realize that being misunderstood does not erase your intentions. It does not cancel your effort. It does not define your worth. Your inner compass matters more than external agreement. And something surprising happens. When you stop trying to control how others see you, some people begin to see you more clearly. Not because you forced it, but because authenticity has a quiet gravity. It attracts those who resonate and releases those who don't. Clarity emerges naturally when it is not chased. From the perspective of surrender, this lesson fits perfectly. Just as you cannot control outcomes, you cannot control perception. Both belong to the wider flow of life. Both soften when you stop gripping them. Peace deepens in the space where explanation is no longer needed. You move through the world lighter, less entangled in invisible negotiations. You allow conversations to end without perfect resolution. You allow distance to grow where understanding cannot. You allow silence to replace endless clarification. And in that silence, there is space to hear your own voice again. This is the freedom that comes from letting people misunderstand you. Not isolation, not indifference, but a calm independence. a sense that your life does not need constant interpretation to be meaningful. As this freedom settles, you notice how much energy returns to you, energy for creating, for loving, for resting, for simply being. The weight of managing perceptions falls away, and what remains is a quieter, steadier presence. You are no longer trying to be seen correctly. You are simply living correctly according to your own truth. And in that shift, something inside finally relaxes, not because the world has become clearer, but because you no longer need it to be. As the need to control how others see you begins to loosen, another pressure slowly comes into focus. The quiet panic about time. Even when you stop forcing outcomes and stop chasing perfect understanding, there can still be a restless voice inside asking, why isn't this happening yet? It measures your life against invisible deadlines, compares your progress to others, and turns waiting into something that feels like failure. There is a particular kind of anxiety that comes not from what is happening, but from when it is happening. A subtle unease appears here. What if life is not late, but unfolding at a pace you were never meant to control? From a young age, many people are taught that life should follow a predictable schedule. Study by this age, achieve by that age, build relationships, careers, stability, meaning, all within a timeline that rarely accounts for the complexity of being human. When life moves differently, the mind interprets it as delay, as if existence were a train you somehow missed. But growth does not follow clocks, it follows readiness. Nature offers quiet proof of this everywhere. Seeds do not sprout because they are impatient. They sprout because conditions are right. Winter does not rush into spring because someone is tired of the cold. Rivers do not flow faster because travelers are eager to arrive. There is a natural intelligence in timing that operates beyond personal urgency. Human beings struggle with this because awareness of time creates pressure. You can count the years, you can compare your path to others, you can imagine futures that seem to be approaching too slowly. This awareness can become a source of suffering when it turns into self-judgment. The mind begins to whisper that you are behind. Surrendering the timeline is not about abandoning effort. It is about releasing the belief that effort must produce immediate visible results. Some changes happen quietly beneath the surface long before they appear outwardly. Healing, maturity, wisdom, emotional strength. These often develop in silence, without announcements or milestones. A person may feel stuck while actually undergoing deep transformation that cannot yet be seen. This hidden work can feel frustrating because it does not satisfy the mind's need for progress markers. There are no trophies for learning patience, no applause for developing resilience, no visible proof that your understanding of life has deepened. Yet these inner shifts shape everything that comes later. Rushing this process can distort it. When people try to force growth, they often skip necessary experiences. They chase shortcuts, adopt identities that have not fully matured, or pursue goals that their inner world is not prepared to sustain. The result is instability, achievements that feel hollow, relationships that collapse under pressure, successes that create new forms of stress. Growth that is rushed rarely feels peaceful. There is also wisdom in the seasons of stillness that life imposes. Periods where nothing seems to change externally can be deeply formative internally. You learn to sit with yourself. You confront fears you were too busy to notice before. You rediscover interests and values that were buried under noise. Stillness is not emptiness. It is preparation. Buddhist teachings often emphasize patience as an active practice, not passive waiting. Patience means allowing life to unfold without constant interference. It means trusting that clarity will come when the mind is quiet enough to receive it. It means respecting that some answers require lived experience rather than intellectual analysis. The urge to rush often comes from discomfort with uncertainty. If you can speed things up, you believe you can reduce the unknown. But speed does not eliminate uncertainty. It only reduces the time available for reflection and adjustment. Trusting the timeline means learning to coexist with uncertainty instead of trying to outrun it. Comparison is another source of pressure that dissolves when surrender deepens. When you constantly measure your life against others, you forget that their timelines include struggles you cannot see. You see their milestones, not their doubts. Their outcomes, not their internal battles. Every path carries invisible work. When you stop comparing, your attention returns to your own journey. You notice the small ways you have grown, the ways you respond differently to challenges than you did years ago, the ways your priorities have shifted toward what truly matters. Progress becomes personal instead of competitive. There is also relief in accepting that some experiences cannot be scheduled. Love cannot be forced to arrive at a convenient time. Inspiration cannot be commanded to appear on demand. Healing cannot be compressed into a predetermined window. These processes have their own rhythms, often influenced by factors beyond your awareness. Respecting those rhythms brings peace. Another hidden gift of surrendering the timeline is the ability to enjoy where you are without constantly treating it as a stepping stone. When you are not obsessed with the next phase, the present becomes richer. Conversations feel more meaningful. Simple activities feel less like distractions and more like life itself. You stop postponing happiness. Many people live as if joy must wait until everything is in place. Once the goal is reached, once the uncertainty is gone, once the future is secure, but the future never arrives as a stable destination. It keeps becoming the present, carrying new uncertainties with it. Learning to find peace now prevents endless waiting. There is courage in trusting that your path is not a race. It requires confidence that your value does not depend on how quickly you arrive somewhere. It requires humility to accept that life may be teaching you lessons you cannot yet recognize. This courage grows quietly, strengthening your ability to move forward without panic. You also begin to appreciate that delays sometimes protect you. Opportunities that appear too early can overwhelm. Relationships that form before emotional readiness can create dependency. Responsibilities taken on prematurely can lead to burnout. Timing can be an ally rather than an obstacle. When you surrender the timeline, you stop interpreting every pause as rejection. You see it as space to prepare, to reflect, to gather strength, space to realign with what truly matters instead of rushing toward what merely looks impressive. This perspective transforms frustration into patience. There is also a deep spiritual dimension here. Trusting timing means acknowledging that life's intelligence extends beyond personal planning. You participate in shaping your path, but you are not the sole author. Countless variables interact in ways you cannot fully predict. Surrender recognizes this complexity without resentment. In practical terms, surrendering the timeline changes daily habits. You focus on consistent effort rather than dramatic breakthroughs. You value routine because it supports long-term growth. You celebrate small improvements because they accumulate quietly over time. You learn to appreciate process over milestones. Rest becomes more acceptable too. You no longer treat exhaustion as weakness. You understand that cycles of activity and recovery are necessary for sustainable growth. Even nature alternates between expansion and dormancy. Nothing alive grows continuously without pause. Relationships also benefit from this patience. You allow trust to build gradually instead of demanding instant closeness. You give people time to reveal themselves. You accept that connection deepens through shared experiences, not accelerated expectations. Time becomes a partner instead of an enemy. As this understanding settles, urgency softens. You still care about your goals, but they no longer define your sense of worth. You still make plans, but they are flexible. You still move forward, but without the tension of racing against an invisible clock. Your life begins to feel more spacious, and in that space, something beautiful happens. Gratitude. Gratitude for the path itself, not just the destination. Gratitude for lessons learned through waiting. Gratitude for the strength developed during uncertain periods. You realize that the timeline you feared was too slow was actually shaping you in ways speed never could. The mind relaxes because it no longer has to monitor progress constantly. The heart softens because it is no longer bracing for disappointment. The body rests because it is no longer driven by urgency. Peace becomes sustainable. From the perspective of surrender, time is not something to conquer. It is something to cooperate with. You align with its rhythm instead of fighting it. You trust that what is meant for you will arrive when you are capable of receiving it fully. And when it does arrive, you will not feel rushed or unprepared. As this trust deepens, life feels less like a schedule to manage and more like a journey to experience. You walk at a pace that allows you to see the landscape, not just the destination. You stop asking, when will it happen? And start appreciating that you are already becoming who you need to be for it to happen. In that quiet shift, surrender no longer feels like waiting. It feels like living fully, right here, right now, without fear that time is slipping away, because nothing that truly belongs to your path can pass you by. As trust in life's timing begins to settle, another quiet pattern becomes visible: the habit of postponing joy. Even when you stop rushing the future, the mind can still place happiness somewhere ahead, just out of reach, attached to conditions that must first be satisfied. It whispers that peace will arrive later, after the next milestone, after the uncertainty clears, after life finally aligns with your expectations. There is a subtle sadness in realizing how often happiness has been treated like a reward instead of a way of being. A tender question surfaces here. How many moments have already passed while waiting for permission to feel okay? Conditional living begins innocently. It sounds reasonable at first. I'll relax when this problem is solved. I'll enjoy life when I feel secure. I'll rest when everything is finished. But everything is never finished. New challenges appear. New responsibilities replace the old ones. The finish line moves each time you get closer. Happiness becomes a horizon, always visible, never reachable. This habit forms because the mind believes that external circumstances control inner peace. It assumes that discomfort must disappear before contentment can exist. It imagines that joy is fragile, something that cannot survive in imperfect conditions. But life is almost always imperfect. When happiness is postponed, the present moment becomes a waiting room again. You go through daily routines as if they are obstacles between you and real living. Meals are eaten quickly, conversations are half-attended, quiet evenings are filled with restless thoughts about what still needs to change. You are alive, but not fully living. This pattern is exhausting because it never allows completion. Even success cannot satisfy it. Once one condition is met, another takes its place. You finally achieve something you work toward, and instead of peace, a new expectation appears. The mind says, this is good, but not enough yet. Contentment keeps retreating. Buddhist teachings describe this as the endless cycle of craving. Not only craving for material things, but craving for emotional states. The desire to secure happiness permanently, to freeze it in place, to guarantee it will not fade. Yet the very attempt to hold happiness tightly causes it to slip away. Joy breathes better when it is not controlled. Conditional living also distorts how you see yourself. Your worth becomes tied to achievements and circumstances. If things are going well, you feel valuable. If they are not, you feel inadequate. This creates a fragile identity that fluctuates with external events. Your inner stability disappears. One of the most painful effects of this trap is that it prevents gratitude. When your mind is fixed on what is missing, it overlooks what is present. Small blessings feel insignificant because they do not match the imagined future you are waiting for. You stop noticing ordinary beauty, sunlight through a window, laughter in a conversation, the comfort of familiar spaces. Life's quiet gifts pass by unnoticed. Escaping this pattern requires a radical shift in perspective. Happiness is not something you secure after solving life. It is something you cultivate while life remains unresolved. It grows from attention, from appreciation, from allowing yourself to feel alive, even in imperfect circumstances. This does not mean ignoring problems. It means refusing to let them define the entirety of your experience. There is courage in allowing joy to coexist with uncertainty. It feels vulnerable at first, as if enjoying the moment might tempt fate. But happiness does not attract loss. It simply makes life richer while it is here. You do not have to earn every smile. Another insight emerges when you observe children or animals. They do not postpone contentment until conditions are perfect. They engage fully with what is available: a game, a sound, a simple comfort. Their joy is immediate because it is not negotiated through expectations. This simplicity is not childish. It is wisdom unburdened by overthinking. Adults often lose this ability because they become preoccupied with evaluation. They analyze whether happiness is justified, whether it will last, whether it might disappear. In doing so, they distance themselves from the direct experience of it. Happiness cannot be fully experienced while being monitored. Learning to receive joy without conditions is a practice. It begins with noticing moments of ease and allowing them to exist without commentary. The warmth of a drink in your hands, the quiet after a long day, the feeling of your body resting without urgency. These moments are small, but they are real. They are not waiting for permission. There is also healing in releasing the belief that happiness must be constant to be valid. Emotional life naturally rises and falls. Peaceful days are followed by challenging ones. Calm mornings give way to restless evenings. Accepting this rhythm reduces the pressure to maintain a perfect state. You stop fearing the return of difficulty. Conditional living often involves chasing a version of yourself that does not yet exist. I'll be happy when I become more confident. I'll be happy when I fix everything about myself. This mindset assumes that self-worth lies in the future, not in who you are now. But growth and self-acceptance can happen simultaneously. When you allow yourself to be at peace while still evolving, you remove the harshness from personal development. Improvement becomes an expression of care rather than a punishment for inadequacy. You grow because you value yourself, not because you dislike who you are. Relationships also change when you escape conditional living. You stop expecting others to fulfill the role of making you happy. You appreciate them for who they are rather than for how they contribute to your sense of completeness. This creates more genuine connection and less pressure. Love becomes lighter. Another hidden freedom is spontaneity. When you are not waiting for ideal conditions, you become open to unexpected opportunities for joy. A sudden invitation, a spontaneous walk, a conversation that deepens without planning. Life offers these moments frequently, but they are easy to miss when you are focused on the future. Presence makes room for surprise. There is also peace in realizing that the future you are waiting for will eventually become the present. If you cannot be content now, you may not recognize contentment later either. The habit of postponement will simply attach itself to new conditions. Happiness practiced now becomes happiness available later. Gratitude plays a powerful role in this transformation, not forced gratitude, but genuine recognition of what is already sustaining you. The breath that continues without effort, the relationships that have endured, the abilities you still possess. These realities are easy to overlook when the mind is searching for what is missing. Gratitude anchors you in the present. Over time, you begin to trust that peace does not depend on solving everything. It depends on how you relate to what is already here. You learn to meet difficulties with steadiness instead of postponing life until they disappear. This steadiness becomes a source of quiet strength. You also discover that joy and sorrow can coexist without canceling each other. You can feel sadness about one part of your life and still appreciate another. Emotional complexity becomes normal instead of confusing. Life becomes richer because it is no longer simplified into good or bad. As conditional living dissolves, your relationship with time changes again. The future stops being a place where happiness is stored. It becomes simply another dimension of life, uncertain but not threatening. You stop negotiating with it and start living in the only moment that exists. Now becomes enough. This shift does not happen all at once. The mind will still drift toward conditions occasionally. It will still say, just wait a little longer. When it does, you gently return to what is present. You remind yourself that this moment is not a rehearsal for life, it is life, and it deserves your full attention. From the perspective of surrender, happiness is not something to capture. It is something that arises naturally when resistance softens. When you stop arguing with reality, when you stop postponing your own peace, you realize that you were never meant to wait for permission to be okay. And in that realization, a quiet warmth spreads through your days. Not dramatic excitement, not constant euphoria, but a steady sense of being at home in your own life. You no longer say, I'll be happy when. You simply allow happiness to exist now, imperfect, fragile, and real. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like enough. As happiness stops being postponed and begins to exist in the present, another truth quietly enters the space you have opened. Peace does not protect you from loss. Even when you are no longer chasing perfect outcomes, no longer rushing timelines, no longer tying joy to conditions, life will still take things away. People leave, bodies change, roles end, places disappear. Moments that once felt permanent dissolve without asking whether you are ready. There is a deeper surrender required here, one that touches the most fragile parts of the heart. A soft ache rises at this point. What if grief hurts more because of how tightly we tried to hold on? Loss is often described as pain, but beneath the pain there is something else, resistance. The mind struggles against what has already happened. It replays memories, searching for a different ending. It resists the reality that something once present is now absent. This resistance does not stop grief. It intensifies it, like tightening around a wound instead of allowing it to breathe. Non-clinging is not the absence of love. It is the willingness to love without trying to freeze time. Grief becomes overwhelming when the heart insists that the past should still exist in the present. The mind says, this should not have happened, as if life were required to follow a script of permanence. But everything in existence is subject to change. Even the most stable forms eventually transform. Recognizing this does not erase sorrow, but it softens the shock that accompanies it. You begin to see that loss is not an interruption of life's flow, it is part of the flow itself. Many people try to avoid grief by distracting themselves or by rushing toward acceptance before they are ready. They treat sorrow as something to fix quickly, something embarrassing, something that should fade on schedule. But grief has its own rhythm, like waves that rise and fall according to forces beneath the surface. Allowing grief means letting those waves move without trying to hold them back. There is courage in feeling loss fully. It means acknowledging that something mattered deeply. It means honoring the connection that existed instead of pretending it did not shape you. When you stop resisting grief, it becomes less sharp and more spacious, like rain instead of a storm. Tears, in this sense, are not weakness. They are the body's way of releasing what the mind cannot carry alone. Non-clinging also changes how you remember what is gone. Instead of replaying memories with longing or regret, you begin to see them as gifts that belonged to a certain time. They were not meant to last forever, but they were real while they existed. This perspective transforms memory from a source of pain into a source of quiet gratitude. You stop asking why it ended and start appreciating that it happened. There is also healing in recognizing that loss reshapes identity, not destroys it. When something significant disappears, a part of your life narrative changes. The roles you played shift. The routines that defined your days dissolve. This can feel like losing yourself, but it can also be an invitation to rediscover who you are beyond those attachments. You are not only what you have lost. Non-clinging teaches that love does not require possession. You can continue caring for someone even after they are no longer present. You can hold their influence in your actions, your values, your kindness. In this way, loss does not erase connection. It transforms it. The relationship moves from physical presence to inner presence. Another hidden source of suffering is guilt, the feeling that you should have prevented the loss or appreciated it more while it existed. This guilt keeps you anchored to the past, replaying scenarios that cannot be changed. Letting go of guilt is part of allowing loss. It acknowledges that you did the best you could with the awareness you had at the time. Compassion toward yourself is essential here. Grief also teaches humility. It reminds you that control is limited, that life's unfolding cannot be fully predicted or prevented. This realization can feel unsettling, but it can also deepen appreciation for what remains. You become more attentive to the people still in your life, more present in everyday interactions, more aware of the fragility of moments. Loss sharpens the value of what is still here. There is a quiet strength in continuing to love life, even after experiencing deep sorrow. Not because you have forgotten, but because you understand that closing your heart would only create more suffering. Openness becomes an act of courage, a refusal to let pain define your future. You learn to carry grief without letting it carry you. Non-clinging does not mean detaching from everything to avoid future pain. It means engaging fully while accepting impermanence. It means loving people without demanding guarantees. It means appreciating experiences without expecting them to last forever. This way of living is tender but resilient. Over time, grief changes shape. It becomes less like a wound and more like a scar, still present, still meaningful, but no longer raw. You may notice moments of peace appearing unexpectedly, moments when you can smile at a memory without breaking. These moments are not betrayals of what you lost. They are signs that healing is happening. Healing does not erase love. It allows love to exist without constant pain. There is also wisdom in recognizing that loss connects you to others. Every human being carries some form of grief. When you allow your own sorrow without resistance, you become more compassionate toward the struggles you cannot see in others. Shared vulnerability becomes a bridge rather than a barrier. You realize you are not alone in your suffering. Buddhist teachings often speak of impermanence as a doorway to awakening. When you truly understand that everything changes, you stop clinging to illusions of permanence. You live more honestly, more attentively, more gently. Each moment becomes precious because it is not guaranteed to repeat. Loss, in this sense, deepens appreciation for life. There is peace in accepting that some pain will remain as part of your story. Not all wounds disappear completely. Some become quiet companions that remind you of your capacity to love deeply. Instead of trying to erase them, you learn to live alongside them. Your heart expands to hold both sorrow and peace. Allowing loss without resistance also means trusting that meaning can emerge from suffering, even if it is not immediately visible. You may discover new priorities, new forms of empathy, new sources of purpose. What felt like an ending can quietly become a turning point. Transformation often begins where certainty ends. As you continue to walk forward, you notice that life still offers beauty. Sunsets still happen. Laughter still appears unexpectedly. New connections form. These experiences do not replace what was lost, but they remind you that life continues to unfold. Hope returns gently, without forcing. You learn that letting go is not forgetting. It is releasing the struggle against what cannot be changed. It is choosing peace over endless resistance. It is allowing the river of life to carry both joy and sorrow without trying to separate them. In this surrender, grief becomes less heavy. From the perspective of non-clinging, loss is not an enemy to defeat, but a teacher to listen to. It teaches tenderness, patience, humility, and the courage to remain open. It shows you that love is not diminished by impermanence, it is intensified by it. You begin to trust that your heart can survive breaking, and in that trust, a quiet calm settles where turmoil once lived. not because the loss no longer matters, but because you are no longer fighting its reality. You carry it with grace instead of resistance. Life continues, not as it was before, but as something new, something shaped by what you have loved and lost, something deeper, softer, more aware of what truly matters. And in that awareness, peace slowly finds its way back home. As grief softens and the heart learns that it can survive what it once thought impossible, a quieter kind of strength begins to appear. The strength of restraint. Not every situation needs fixing. Not every silence needs filling. Not every pain needs immediate action. After walking through loss, you start to sense that sometimes the deepest healing came not from doing more, but from allowing space for life to move on its own. A calm realization begins to form. What if helping too much can quietly become another form of control? There is a natural desire to intervene when something feels uncomfortable. When someone you love is struggling, you want to step in. When a problem appears, you want to solve it quickly. When uncertainty grows, you want to impose order. Action feels responsible, compassionate, necessary. Yet not all action creates improvement. Some actions disrupt processes that need time to unfold. Life often resolves things in ways the mind cannot anticipate. Non-interference is not indifference. It is a deeper form of respect for the intelligence of situations that do not belong entirely to you. It recognizes that each person carries their own path, their own lessons, their own timing. Trying to control that path, even with good intentions, can prevent growth that only experience can produce. A seed does not sprout faster because you keep digging it up to check. Many people struggle with this because they equate action with love. If they are not doing something, they feel they are abandoning responsibility. But love can also mean allowing space. It can mean trusting that someone is capable of finding their own strength. It can mean resisting the urge to rescue when rescue would only create dependency. Support does not always require intervention. There is wisdom in recognizing when a situation is asking for presence instead of solutions. Sometimes listening is more powerful than advice. Sometimes companionship is more healing than correction. Sometimes the best gift you can offer is your calm, steady attention. Presence communicates safety without imposing control. Non-interference also applies to your own inner life. When difficult emotions arise, the instinct is often to suppress them or replace them quickly with something more comfortable. But emotions, like weather, move through their own cycles. Trying to push them away too soon can prolong their presence. Allowing feelings to exist without immediate reaction creates space for understanding. Another dimension of this wisdom is recognizing when effort becomes obstruction. There are moments when pushing harder does not create progress, but resistance. Conversations that escalate because you insist on being understood. Projects that stall because you refuse to adjust direction. Relationships that strain because you try to manage every detail. Sometimes stepping back allows movement to resume. This stepping back can feel counterintuitive. It challenges the belief that constant activity is the path to resolution. But stillness often reveals information that action obscures. When you pause, patterns become visible. When you stop forcing, natural solutions emerge. Clarity prefers quiet over urgency. In nature, this principle appears everywhere. Water flows around obstacles instead of breaking itself against them. Trees bend in strong winds rather than resisting until they snap. Animals conserve energy until the moment it is truly needed. There is an intelligence in this restraint that humans often forget. Force is not always strength. Non-interference requires humility because it acknowledges that you do not see the entire picture. Your perspective is limited, shaped by personal experience and emotion. Acting too quickly assumes certainty where there may be none. Waiting allows hidden factors to surface. Patience becomes a form of wisdom. This approach also protects relationships from unnecessary strain. When you stop trying to control outcomes for others, tension decreases. People feel less judged, less pressured, more free to be honest. Trust grows because autonomy is respected. Freedom strengthens connection. There is also relief in not carrying responsibility for everything. Many people exhaust themselves trying to manage situations that are not theirs to solve. They worry about choices others make, paths others take, mistakes others repeat. Letting go of this burden does not mean you stop caring. It means you recognize the limits of your influence. Caring does not require control. Non-interference helps you conserve energy for what truly belongs to you. Your actions, your values, your responses. Instead of scattering your attention across countless external concerns, you focus on what you can actually shape. This creates a sense of groundedness and calm. Your life becomes more manageable. Another subtle benefit is that it reduces conflict with reality. When you interfere less, you resist less. You stop arguing with circumstances that cannot be changed immediately. You adapt instead of insisting. This adaptability allows you to move with life's currents rather than against them. Movement becomes smoother. There are moments when action is necessary, of course. Non-interference is not passivity. It is discernment, knowing when to step forward and when to step aside. It is the ability to sense whether your involvement will support or disrupt. Wisdom lies in this balance. You learn to ask gentle questions before acting. Is this mine to fix? Is intervention truly helpful, or is it driven by discomfort with uncertainty? Am I responding to the situation or to my own fear of inaction? These questions create space between impulse and decision. Over time, you notice that many problems resolve themselves when given time. Misunderstandings clear, emotions settle, perspectives shift. What felt urgent loses intensity. The world continues moving even without your interference. Trust grows from witnessing this process repeatedly. Non-interference also deepens self-trust. When you stop micromanaging life, you discover your ability to respond effectively when action truly matters. You are no longer drained by constant effort, so you can act with clarity and strength when needed. Energy becomes available for meaningful action. There is a quiet confidence that comes from this approach. You no longer panic when situations remain unresolved. You understand that resolution is not always immediate. You become comfortable with open-endedness, with allowing life to reveal its direction gradually. Uncertainty becomes less threatening. From a spiritual perspective, non-interference reflects faith in a larger order, not necessarily a predetermined plan, but a natural unfolding that does not require constant supervision. You participate in this unfolding rather than trying to dominate it. Participation feels lighter than control. As this wisdom settles, your daily life changes in subtle ways. You speak less but listen more. You react less but observe more. You move with intention rather than urgency. Even your body reflects this shift. Slower breathing, relaxed shoulders, a steadier rhythm. Calm becomes visible. You also begin to appreciate the beauty of processes that cannot be rushed. Healing, learning, reconciliation, personal transformation, these unfold over time. Interfering with them often delays progress rather than accelerating it. Respecting process is an act of patience. Eventually, you realize that non-interference is not about withdrawing from life, but about engaging with it more intelligently. It is choosing actions that align with reality rather than fighting against it. It is recognizing that sometimes the most powerful contribution you can make is simply not obstructing what is already trying to heal. This realization feels like a deep exhale. From the perspective of surrender, non-interference completes the movement away from control. You are no longer trying to force outcomes, manage perceptions, rush timelines, or eliminate uncertainty. You are learning to trust the flow itself. Life becomes less like a battlefield and more like a landscape to walk through, and as you walk, you notice something unexpected. When you stop interfering unnecessarily, life feels more cooperative. Opportunities appear naturally. Conversations deepen without pressure. Solutions emerge without struggle. Harmony replaces resistance. You understand now that action has its place, but so does stillness. Intervention has its moment, but so does patience. Effort matters, but so does surrender. In this balance, wisdom lives. And for the first time, doing less no longer feels like neglect. It feels like alignment, a quiet agreement with life that you will act when action is needed and step aside when movement is already happening. In that agreement, peace continues to grow, steady and unforced, like a river that knows exactly where it is going without needing to be pushed. As you learn the quiet strength of stepping back and allowing life to move without constant interference, another chain begins to loosen, the need for approval. Even when you stop trying to control situations and people, there can still be a hidden dependence on how others judge your actions. A compliment can lift you higher than your own peace, and a criticism can pull you lower than your own understanding. It becomes clear that control does not only appear in actions, it also appears in how tightly you hold other people's opinions. A subtle vulnerability reveals itself here. What if your mood has been living at the mercy of voices outside you? Praise feels warm because it reassures the part of you that wants to be accepted. Blame feels sharp because it touches the fear of rejection. Both reactions are natural, but when they begin to define your sense of self, they become invisible chains. Your inner stability starts to depend on fluctuating verdicts that change from person to person and moment to moment. No human opinion is permanent. Detaching from praise and blame does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means recognizing that both approval and criticism are reflections of perspective, not absolute truth. People respond through the lens of their experiences, preferences, and expectations. What one person admires, another may dismiss. What one criticizes, another may value deeply. Trying to satisfy every viewpoint is an endless task. When you rely heavily on praise, you unconsciously start shaping your behavior to maintain it. You speak in ways that will be applauded. You hide parts of yourself that might provoke disagreement. You measure success by reactions instead of alignment with your values. Over time, authenticity erodes quietly. You become a performer instead of a participant in your own life. Blame creates a different distortion. When you fear criticism, you may hesitate to act at all. Decisions feel dangerous because they might be judged. Creativity shrinks because it invites evaluation. You second-guess yourself constantly, replaying interactions to analyze whether you were perceived correctly. Fear of blame limits possibility. Both praise and blame pull attention outward, away from the inner compass that guides your true direction. Instead of asking, "Is this right for me?" you begin asking, "How will this be received?" Life becomes a negotiation with imagined audiences. Detachment restores that inner reference point. Buddhist teachings often describe this as freedom from the 8 worldly winds: pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and disrepute. These forces move constantly, like weather patterns. If you try to control them, you exhaust yourself. If you learn to stand steady while they pass, peace becomes possible. You cannot stop the winds, but you can stop letting them carry you. Detachment from praise begins with noticing how pleasant feedback affects your body and mind. The warmth, the surge of energy, the desire for more. There is nothing wrong with enjoying appreciation, but awareness prevents dependency. You learn to receive praise without clinging to it, like accepting a gift without building your identity around it. Gratitude replaces attachment. Detachment from blame requires compassion for yourself. Criticism can hurt because it often triggers deeper insecurities. Instead of reacting defensively or collapsing inward, you learn to listen calmly. Some criticism contains useful information, some reflects the other person's projection. Discernment allows you to separate these without emotional turbulence. Wisdom grows through this balance. There is also freedom in accepting that you will be misunderstood at times, no matter how carefully you act. Different people prioritize different values. What seems generous to one may seem unnecessary to another. What feels honest to you may feel blunt to someone else. Trying to eliminate all negative judgments is impossible. Peace comes from accepting this reality. When you detach from external verdicts, motivation shifts. You act because something matters to you, not because it will earn recognition. You speak because truth feels necessary, not because silence would be approved. You create because expression feels alive, not because it will be praised. Your actions become self-sustaining. This shift also stabilizes emotional life. Good days are no longer defined by compliments, and difficult days are not defined by criticism. Your sense of worth becomes less fragile because it rests on internal understanding rather than fluctuating feedback. Stability replaces volatility. Relationships benefit from this detachment too. When you are not seeking constant validation, interactions become more genuine. You listen without secretly hoping for approval. You share honestly without crafting every sentence for acceptance. This authenticity invites deeper connection. Respect replaces performance. Another hidden benefit is resilience. When external verdicts lose their power, setbacks feel less personal. Failure becomes information rather than condemnation. You learn faster because you are not paralyzed by the fear of judgment. Growth accelerates when ego softens. Detachment also encourages humility. You recognize that praise does not make you invincible and blame does not make you worthless. Both are partial reflections, not final definitions. This perspective keeps you grounded during success and steady during difficulty. Balance becomes natural. From a spiritual viewpoint, detaching from praise and blame is a step toward inner freedom. It removes the illusion that identity is constructed from other people's opinions. You begin to experience yourself as something deeper. Awareness observing the passing judgments without being defined by them. Silence becomes a refuge. You also notice how much energy is freed when you stop monitoring how you are perceived. Mental space opens, creativity returns. Attention shifts toward meaningful pursuits instead of reputation management. Life feels lighter. This does not mean you stop caring about others entirely. Compassion remains. Kindness remains, but they are no longer strategies for approval. They are expressions of your nature. You give because giving feels right, not because it will be noticed. Intention replaces image. There is peace in knowing that you cannot control how your actions will be interpreted. Once you have acted with sincerity, the rest belongs to the world. This release prevents endless rumination about whether you did enough or said the right thing. Completion replaces overthinking. Over time, you develop a quiet confidence that does not require applause. You trust your judgment because it is informed by reflection rather than reaction. You become less reactive to criticism because you know who you are beyond it. Self-knowledge becomes the foundation. Detachment from praise and blame also changes how you relate to success. Instead of chasing recognition, you focus on meaningful contribution. Instead of fearing failure, you see it as part of the process. Achievement becomes fulfilling in itself, not as a means to validation. Purpose replaces ego. As this wisdom deepens, external opinions lose their emotional charge. They become information rather than commands. You can consider them thoughtfully without surrendering your autonomy. Freedom grows quietly. From the perspective of surrender, this lesson completes another layer of release. You have stepped back from controlling outcomes, perceptions, timelines, and interference. Now you step back from the need for judgment to define you. Your peace becomes self-sustaining. Life continues to offer praise and blame, just as it offers pleasure and pain. But they no longer dictate your direction. They pass through your experience like weather across a landscape that remains unchanged beneath. You stand steady, and in that steadiness, a deep calm takes root. Not the fragile calm that depends on approval, but a grounded peace that comes from knowing you are living in alignment with what feels true. No verdict can give you that. No criticism can take it away. You move forward, guided by your own understanding, open to learning, but not captive to opinion, engaged with the world, but anchored within yourself. And in that quiet independence, surrender reveals its deepest gift, the freedom to be at peace regardless of how the world evaluates you. As external opinions lose their grip and your sense of self stops rising and falling with praise or blame, a deeper source of fatigue becomes visible, the constant effort to manage everything. Even without chasing approval, the mind can still try to supervise life itself, adjusting every detail, anticipating every problem, monitoring every possibility as if existence were a fragile machine that could collapse without your oversight. A quiet heaviness settles here. What if the exhaustion you carry is not from what you have lived through, but from trying to control what was never yours to run? Micromanaging reality begins subtly. It appears as attentiveness, as responsibility, as a desire to prevent mistakes. You replay conversations to make sure you said the right thing. You analyze future scenarios to avoid surprises. You check repeatedly whether plans are still on track. Each act feels reasonable on its own, but together they create a mental workload that never truly ends. The mind becomes a supervisor that never leaves the office. This constant monitoring drains energy because it keeps the nervous system in a state of alertness. Even when nothing is happening externally, internally there is activity, planning, adjusting, predicting, evaluating. Rest becomes difficult because the mind does not believe it is safe to stop. Fatigue accumulates without visible cause. There is a difference between thoughtful preparation and compulsive control. Preparation acknowledges uncertainty and then releases it. Control tries to eliminate uncertainty entirely. Since uncertainty cannot be removed from life, control becomes an endless task. You chase completion that never arrives. This exhaustion is not only mental, it becomes physical. Tension in the shoulders, headaches, shallow breathing, disrupted sleep. The body reflects the pressure of carrying responsibilities that exceed human capacity. You are not designed to manage every variable in a complex world. Your system begins to protest. Micromanaging reality also reduces spontaneity. When every action is calculated for safety, opportunities for discovery shrink. You become cautious even in harmless situations, reluctant to explore because exploration involves unpredictability. Curiosity fades under constant supervision. Another hidden cost is the loss of trust, not only in others, but in life itself. When you believe that everything depends on your vigilance, you stop noticing how much unfolds without your intervention. You forget that many processes continue smoothly even when you are not watching. Control obscures natural flow. Relationships can suffer too. When you try to manage outcomes for others, it can feel like pressure rather than support. People sense when they are being monitored instead of trusted. This can create distance, even when your intentions are caring. Trust grows where control loosens. Micromanaging also prevents learning through experience. Mistakes become threatening because they disrupt your plans. Yet mistakes often carry valuable lessons that cannot be obtained any other way. By trying to prevent them entirely, you limit growth. Perfection blocks evolution. Buddhist teachings emphasize the middle path, neither careless passivity nor obsessive control. It encourages acting with awareness and then allowing results to unfold naturally. This approach conserves energy because it focuses effort where it is effective and releases it where it is not. Energy becomes purposeful instead of scattered. There is relief in recognizing that you do not need to anticipate every possibility to be safe. Human beings are remarkably adaptable. You have already navigated unexpected events throughout your life. Remembering this restores confidence in your ability to respond instead of predict. Response requires less energy than constant anticipation. Letting go of micromanagement also allows creativity to return. When the mind is not preoccupied with controlling outcomes, it can explore new ideas freely. Solutions emerge organically rather than being forced through stress. Innovation prefers openness. You begin to see that uncertainty is not always an enemy. It can be a source of renewal. New relationships, insights, and opportunities often arise from situations that were not planned. Control would have prevented them from appearing. Surprise becomes a gift instead of a threat. Another aspect of exhaustion comes from emotional micromanagement, trying to regulate how you feel at all times. When sadness appears, you try to replace it immediately. When anger surfaces, you suppress it. This constant editing of emotional life consumes energy and prevents authentic processing. Feelings settle more easily when allowed to move. Detaching from this internal control creates space for natural balance. Emotions rise and fall like waves, and without interference they often pass more quickly. You learn to ride them instead of resisting them. Acceptance restores vitality. Time also feels different when you stop micromanaging reality. Days no longer feel like tasks to complete, but experiences to move through. You notice details that were previously overshadowed by planning. The rhythm of your breath, the texture of your surroundings, the quiet between sounds. Presence replaces urgency. There is also humility in admitting that life does not revolve around your management. The world existed before you and will continue after you. This realization is not discouraging. It is liberating. You are free to participate without carrying the illusion of total responsibility. Participation feels lighter than control. As you release this burden, rest becomes possible again. Sleep deepens because the mind is not rehearsing tomorrow. Leisure feels genuine because it is not interrupted by guilt about unfinished monitoring. Your body begins to recover from chronic tension. Vital energy returns slowly but steadily. This restored energy can be directed toward meaningful pursuits: creativity, connection, learning, contribution. Instead of being consumed by maintenance of imagined threats, it becomes fuel for experiences that enrich your life. Life expands where energy flows freely. You also become more patient with yourself. Micromanagement often includes harsh self-criticism when things do not go as planned. Letting go softens this inner voice. You acknowledge mistakes without treating them as personal failures. Compassion replaces pressure. From a broader perspective, surrendering control aligns you with the natural rhythm of existence. Day follows night without supervision. Seasons change without intervention. Growth and decay occur simultaneously in every ecosystem. You are part of this rhythm, not separate from it. Harmony replaces struggle. This harmony is not passive. It is attentive without being anxious. You act when action is needed, rest when rest is possible, and trust the unfolding of events you cannot influence. Life becomes less like a problem to solve and more like a journey to experience. Peace grows in this perspective. The exhaustion of micromanaging reality fades when you realize that safety does not come from control, but from adaptability. You do not need to hold everything together. You need to remain flexible enough to meet what comes. Flexibility conserves strength. As this understanding deepens, the constant tension dissolves into a quieter awareness. You notice how much lighter your mind feels without endless supervision. How much easier breathing becomes when you stop bracing for impact. Calm becomes your default state instead of an exception. You start to trust that not every detail requires your attention, that life can handle itself in many ways, that your role is not to dominate the process, but to engage with it thoughtfully. This trust restores dignity to your effort. From the perspective of surrender, letting go of micromanagement is like putting down a heavy tool you have been carrying for years. You realize it was never meant to be used constantly. It was only needed occasionally. Your hands are free again. With that freedom comes a sense of spaciousness. You can observe without reacting, act without forcing, rest without guilt. The world continues moving, and you move with it instead of trying to steer it. Energy circulates instead of draining away, and in this renewed vitality, you discover something simple yet profound. Life feels lighter when you stop trying to control every part of it. Not because everything becomes easy, but because you are no longer fighting the natural movement of existence. You are finally living instead of managing. In that shift, exhaustion gives way to quiet strength, and surrender reveals itself not as weakness, but as the most sustainable way to move through a world that was never meant to be controlled. As the weight of constant control falls away and your energy slowly returns, something unexpected begins to reappear, a sense of openness you may not have felt in years. When you are no longer busy managing every outcome, monitoring every risk, or predicting every possibility, there is suddenly space where tension used to live. And in that space, life has room to move again in ways you could never have planned. A quiet curiosity awakens here. What if the most meaningful moments were always the ones you didn't schedule? Expectations shape perception. When you believe you already know how something will unfold, your mind stops paying attention. It filters out details that do not match the script you created. This is why life can start to feel repetitive even when circumstances change. You are not seeing what is new because you are looking for what is familiar. Letting go of expectations restores freshness to experience. Children naturally live this way. They approach ordinary things with fascination because they have not yet learned to categorize everything. A simple walk becomes an adventure. A new sound becomes a mystery. Nothing is taken for granted. As adults, the habit of prediction replaces this openness. We assume we know what tomorrow will feel like because it looks similar to yesterday. Wonder fades under certainty. Rediscovering surprise requires loosening the grip of anticipation. It means allowing events to reveal themselves before deciding how you feel about them. When you stop rushing ahead mentally, the present moment becomes richer. You notice subtleties. The tone in someone's voice, the pattern of light through a window, the way your mood shifts during the day. Awareness deepens when expectations soften. Surprise also carries humility. It reminds you that life is larger than your understanding. No matter how carefully you plan, there will always be elements you cannot predict. This is not a flaw in the system. It is what keeps existence dynamic. Uncertainty becomes a doorway instead of a threat. Many of the most meaningful connections in life happen unexpectedly. Friendships form from chance conversations. Opportunities arise from paths you did not intend to take. Insights appear during quiet moments rather than intense effort. These experiences feel significant precisely because they were not forced. Serendipity thrives in openness. When you release rigid expectations, disappointment decreases. Instead of comparing reality to an imagined ideal, you engage with what is actually present. This does not mean lowering standards. It means allowing room for different forms of fulfillment. Satisfaction becomes more accessible. There is also joy in discovering that life can still surprise you even after years of routine. A new interest emerges. A place you thought you understood reveals another side. A person you assumed you knew deeply shares something unexpected. These moments refresh the sense that life is still unfolding. Novelty rekindles vitality. Letting life surprise you also transforms challenges. When difficulties arise, they are no longer immediately labeled as negative. They become situations to explore, experiences that may contain lessons or opportunities not yet visible. This perspective reduces fear because it replaces certainty of failure with curiosity about outcome. Curiosity softens resistance. From a spiritual viewpoint, surprise is a reminder that existence is alive, not mechanical. It cannot be fully mapped or predicted because it is constantly changing. Participating in this living process requires flexibility rather than rigid control. Adaptability becomes a form of wisdom. You may also notice that creativity flourishes when expectations loosen. Without the pressure to produce a specific result, your mind experiments more freely. Ideas combine in new ways. Solutions appear where you previously saw only obstacles. Freedom fuels imagination. Relationships benefit as well. When you stop expecting people to behave according to fixed roles, you allow them to grow. Conversations become more interesting because you are listening instead of waiting for confirmation of what you already believe. You discover dimensions of others that surprise you. Connection deepens through openness. Letting life surprise you does not mean abandoning intention entirely. You can still set directions and pursue goals. The difference is that you remain receptive to adjustments along the way. You treat plans as guides rather than rigid instructions. Flexibility prevents frustration. There is peace in knowing that you do not need to anticipate every joy in order to experience it. Many beautiful moments arrive quietly, without announcement. They reveal themselves only to those who are present enough to notice. Presence becomes the gateway to wonder. This openness also changes how you relate to time. Instead of rushing toward future milestones, you begin to appreciate the unfolding process. Each stage holds something unique that cannot be repeated once it passes. Surprise often lives in these transitions. Life feels fuller when you stop skipping ahead. Another subtle shift occurs in how you experience yourself. Without the pressure to control outcomes or predict reactions, you become more spontaneous. You respond authentically instead of calculating responses in advance. This spontaneity feels alive, as if you are reconnecting with a part of yourself that had been waiting quietly. Authenticity restores joy. You may also find that gratitude increases. When good things happen unexpectedly, they feel like gifts rather than entitlements. Appreciation grows because you recognize that not everything is guaranteed. Gratitude amplifies happiness. Even ordinary moments become interesting again. A meal tastes richer when you are not distracted by planning. A conversation feels deeper when you are not rehearsing responses. A quiet evening holds peace when you are not thinking about what should happen next. Simplicity regains its beauty. Letting life surprise you requires trust. Trust that not knowing everything does not mean losing control, but gaining freedom. It is the trust that whatever arises can be met with awareness and resilience. Trust replaces vigilance. This trust also dissolves boredom. When you approach each day as an unfolding experience rather than a predictable routine, curiosity replaces monotony. You begin to look forward to what you cannot foresee. Anticipation shifts from anxiety to excitement. There is a sense of playfulness that returns as well. You allow yourself to explore without demanding productivity from every action. You follow interests simply because they feel engaging. This playfulness reconnects you with the joy of being alive. Play becomes a form of renewal. Over time, you realize that surprise is not rare. It was always present, hidden beneath expectations. Life has been offering new experiences continuously, but you were too focused on controlling outcomes to notice. Awareness reveals abundance. From the perspective of surrender, letting life surprise you is a natural extension of releasing control. When you stop forcing reality to match your plans, you create space for reality to offer something different, sometimes better than what you imagined. Possibility expands beyond prediction. This openness does not eliminate pain or difficulty, but it prevents life from feeling predetermined. Even during hard times, there can be unexpected kindness, insight, or growth. Surprise becomes a reminder that change is always possible. Hope stays alive through uncertainty. As you continue walking this path, wonder becomes a quiet companion. You begin to experience existence not as a problem to solve, but as a mystery to engage with. Each day carries the potential for something new, something meaningful, something unplanned. Life feels alive again, and in that aliveness you discover a gentle excitement, not the restless excitement of chasing outcomes, but the calm anticipation of participating in something larger than your expectations. You are no longer managing life, you are meeting it. In this meeting, surrender reveals another gift, the rediscovery of wonder, the simple yet profound joy of realizing that no matter how much you have seen, life still has the capacity to surprise you. And that quiet sense of wonder becomes a steady light, guiding you forward without pressure, without control, only with openness to whatever unfolds next. As wonder returns and life begins to feel alive again, another pattern quietly reveals itself, the habit of constant alertness. Even while rediscovering surprise and openness, There may still be a part of you scanning for danger, preparing for disappointment, watching carefully so nothing unexpected can hurt you. It becomes clear that surrender is not only about letting go of control over events, but also about loosening the grip of constant vigilance. A gentle question surfaces here. What if the exhaustion you feel comes from never allowing yourself to truly relax? Hypervigilance often begins as protection. At some point, staying alert may have helped you navigate uncertainty, avoid pain, or manage unpredictable situations. The mind learned to anticipate threats before they arrived. It learned to monitor tone of voice, facial expressions, subtle shifts in mood, environmental changes. This skill can be useful in difficult circumstances, but when it continues long after the danger has passed, it becomes a burden. Safety requires awareness, not permanent alarm. Living in a state of continuous monitoring keeps the nervous system activated. The body remains prepared for action even when no action is needed. Muscles stay tense. Breathing becomes shallow. Sleep feels light and easily interrupted. You wake up tired because rest was never complete. The body cannot heal while it believes it must stay ready. Releasing hypervigilance requires courage because it involves trusting that you can handle whatever happens without constant preparation. It means allowing uncertainty to exist without trying to neutralize it in advance. This can feel uncomfortable at first, like stepping into open space after years of holding on to railings. Freedom can feel unfamiliar before it feels peaceful. The mind may resist letting go, insisting that vigilance is necessary for survival. It presents scenarios of what could go wrong if you stop watching. But most of these scenarios are echoes of past experiences rather than reflections of present reality. Memory can masquerade as prediction. Learning to stop monitoring everything begins with small acts of trust, allowing silence without filling it, leaving tasks unfinished without anxiety, letting conversations end without replaying them mentally. Each of these moments teaches the nervous system that stillness is not dangerous. Calm becomes gradually believable. Another step is recognizing that not everything requires your attention. Many processes unfold independently. People solve their own problems, situations evolve, time resolves tensions. By observing how often things stabilize without your intervention, you begin to loosen the belief that your vigilance is essential. Life demonstrates its own resilience. Hypervigilance also limits emotional availability. When you are busy scanning for threats, it is difficult to be fully present for joy. Pleasant moments feel fragile because you are anticipating when they might end. You hesitate to relax into happiness because you fear losing it. Guarding against pain blocks pleasure. Letting down this guard allows warmth to enter more freely. Laughter feels deeper. Conversations feel lighter. Beauty becomes easier to notice. You are no longer dividing attention between the present moment and imagined future risks. Presence expands when fear recedes. There is also a profound relief in accepting that you cannot foresee every outcome. The mind often confuses prediction with safety, but true safety comes from adaptability. You have already survived unexpected situations before. Trusting this capacity reduces the need for constant monitoring. Confidence grows from remembered resilience. Relationships benefit as well. When you stop watching people for signs of disappointment or conflict, interactions become more natural. You listen without analyzing. You respond without rehearsing. Trust replaces suspicion. Connection thrives in relaxation. Hypervigilance can also create self-pressure. You feel responsible for maintaining stability at all times, as if a single mistake could unravel everything. This pressure erodes self-compassion and makes rest feel undeserved. Letting go restores gentleness toward yourself. From a Buddhist perspective, vigilance rooted in fear is a form of attachment to certainty, to control, to avoidance of pain. Releasing it is not about becoming careless, but about recognizing that clinging to safety creates its own suffering. Peace comes from balance, not extremes. Practices like mindful breathing can help retrain the nervous system. Slow, deliberate breaths signal that immediate danger is not present. Over time, this simple act can reduce the intensity of alertness and create a sense of groundedness. The body learns safety through repetition. You may also find comfort in widening your attention instead of narrowing it. Instead of focusing on potential threats, notice neutral or pleasant details around you. Sounds, textures, colors. This shift reminds the brain that the environment contains more than danger. Awareness becomes expansive rather than defensive. Stopping the habit of monitoring everything also involves accepting vulnerability. Absolute safety does not exist. Trying to eliminate all risk prevents authentic living. When you accept that some uncertainty will always remain, the need for constant surveillance diminishes. Courage replaces illusion. There is strength in allowing yourself to be at ease, even when outcomes are not guaranteed. This strength is quiet, steady, and sustainable. It does not depend on controlling circumstances, but on trusting your ability to respond. Ease becomes a form of resilience. As vigilance decreases, time feels different. Moments stretch instead of rushing past. You notice the rhythm of your day instead of racing through it. This slower pace supports healing and clarity. Stillness becomes nourishing. You also discover that rest is productive in its own way. It restores energy, sharpens perception, and allows insights to emerge naturally. When you are not constantly alert, your mind can process experiences more deeply. Recovery enables wisdom. Letting go of hypervigilance reveals how much of life was passing unnoticed while you were scanning for threats. Ordinary beauty, subtle kindness, quiet opportunities, all were present, waiting for your attention to return. Awareness shifts from defense to appreciation. There is also a sense of reclaiming personal space. Instead of being consumed by monitoring external factors, you reconnect with your own thoughts, feelings, and desires. You remember what it feels like to live from within, rather than reacting to outside stimuli. Inner life becomes accessible again. Over time, you realize that courage is not only about facing danger, but also about allowing peace. It takes bravery to believe that you deserve calm, that relaxation is not negligence, that joy does not need constant protection. Peace requires permission. From the perspective of surrender, releasing hypervigilance completes another layer of letting go. You are no longer trying to control outcomes, manage perceptions, rush timelines, or supervise every detail. You are allowing yourself to exist without constant defense. Existence becomes lighter. In this lighter state, energy flows differently. Instead of being consumed by monitoring, it becomes available for creativity, connection, and presence. Life feels less like a series of potential threats and more like a field of experiences. Openness replaces tension. You begin to trust that vigilance can be reserved for moments when it is truly needed, not maintained as a permanent state. This selective awareness is far more sustainable and far less exhausting. Wisdom replaces habit, and as this trust deepens, the body finally relaxes in ways it may not have for years. Breathing slows, shoulders soften, sleep deepens. A quiet sense of safety emerges from within rather than being imposed from outside. Security becomes internal. In that quiet safety, you discover a profound freedom, the freedom to live without constantly looking over your shoulder, the freedom to experience the present without calculating future risks, the freedom to rest without guilt. You are no longer guarding life, you are living it. And in that shift, surrender reveals another truth. Courage is not only found in action, but in the willingness to stop watching for danger and allow peace to enter without resistance. As vigilance softens and the body finally remembers what it feels like to rest, another quiet discomfort often rises to the surface. The unresolved questions left behind by what never received a proper ending. Even when you stop scanning for danger and allow yourself to feel safe again, the mind may still wander back to certain moments, certain people, certain opportunities that disappeared without clarity. Not every chapter closes with an explanation. Not every silence is followed by understanding. A tender ache lives here. How do you release something that never made sense? Human beings crave resolution. The mind searches for reasons because reasons create a sense of order. When something ends without explanation, it leaves a gap that logic cannot fill. You replay conversations, revisit decisions, analyze tiny details, hoping to discover the missing piece that will finally settle the discomfort. Unanswered questions echo louder than painful truths. Acceptance begins with recognizing that closure does not always come from outside. Waiting for someone else to explain, apologize, or clarify can keep you tied to a past that has already moved on. Closure is not a gift others give. It is a process you create within yourself. You stop waiting for permission to heal. There is grief in acknowledging that some endings will remain incomplete. A friendship fades without conflict. A relationship ends without a final conversation. An opportunity vanishes without warning. These experiences can feel like stories interrupted mid-sentence. Silence becomes the final chapter. The mind often interprets this silence as rejection or failure, but many endings occur simply because circumstances changed. People grow in different directions. Priorities shift. Timing fails to align. Not every departure is a verdict on your worth. Life moves according to currents you cannot always see. Finding closure without answers requires letting go of the belief that understanding will remove pain. Sometimes understanding helps, but sometimes it only replaces one question with another. Peace comes not from knowing everything, but from accepting the limits of what can be known. Mystery can coexist with calm. There is also strength in acknowledging that you did what you could with the awareness you had at the time. Regret often grows from imagining that you should have acted differently, spoken more clearly, tried harder. But hindsight has information you did not possess then. Compassion toward your past self softens regret. Acceptance does not erase sadness. It allows sadness to exist without turning into obsession. You remember what was lost without needing to solve it. Memories become reflections rather than puzzles. The past stops demanding explanation. This process also involves releasing imagined conversations, the words you wish you had said, the responses you hoped to hear. These mental dialogues can keep emotional wounds open because they simulate connection that no longer exists. Letting go frees energy for the present. There is peace in recognizing that not every connection was meant to last forever. Some people enter your life to teach a lesson, to share a season, to influence a path, and then they leave. Their absence does not erase their impact. Meaning remains even when presence disappears. Closure without answers also requires trust that the ending served a purpose, even if that purpose is not immediately visible. You may later discover that what felt like loss created space for something new, a different direction, a deeper understanding, a stronger sense of self. Time reveals patterns that confusion hides. Another part of acceptance is allowing yourself to feel what was left unsaid. When endings are abrupt, emotions can remain suspended. Giving yourself permission to grieve the unfinished story helps those feelings settle. Expression transforms stagnation into movement. You may find comfort in creating your own ritual of closure, writing a letter you never send, revisiting a meaningful place, acknowledging the end privately. These acts symbolize completion even when no external ceremony occurred. Symbolic endings support emotional release. It also helps to remember that explanations do not always satisfy. Even when reasons are given, they may not align with your experience. People interpret events differently, and their version of the story may not bring peace. Understanding is not the same as agreement. Acceptance grows when you shift focus from why it happened to how you will move forward. The future does not depend on resolving the past perfectly. It depends on your willingness to keep living despite uncertainty. Movement creates new meaning. There is freedom in deciding that unanswered questions no longer control your emotional state. You acknowledge their presence but refuse to let them define your identity or limit your possibilities. You reclaim authorship of your story. Closure also deepens self-trust. When you stop searching for external explanations, you begin listening to your own understanding. You recognize patterns, values, and boundaries that guide future choices. Insight replaces confusion. From a Buddhist perspective, attachment to certainty is another form of suffering. The desire for clear answers can keep the mind trapped in analysis instead of allowing it to rest. Releasing this attachment opens space for peace. Stillness replaces interrogation. As acceptance settles, memories lose their sharp edges. They become part of your narrative rather than disruptions to it. You can recall what happened without being pulled back into emotional turmoil. Integration replaces fragmentation. You also discover that closure is not a single moment, but a gradual process. Some days the absence feels distant. Other days it resurfaces unexpectedly. Patience with this rhythm prevents frustration with your own healing. Healing moves at its own pace. There is humility in admitting that life will always contain unanswered questions. This humility makes you gentler with yourself and others. You stop expecting perfect clarity from a world that is constantly changing. Expectations soften into acceptance. Letting go of the need for explanation also restores curiosity about what lies ahead. Instead of being anchored to what ended, your attention shifts toward what is emerging. New experiences begin to fill the space left behind. Possibility replaces fixation. Relationships benefit from this shift too. You become less fearful of endings because you trust your ability to recover. You engage more fully without clinging to permanence. Connection becomes freer. You may even feel gratitude for what was, not because it ended perfectly, but because it existed at all. Appreciation transforms loss into part of your growth rather than a permanent wound. Gratitude changes perspective. From the path of surrender, this lesson deepens your capacity to live without guarantees. You no longer demand explanations before allowing peace. You accept that some parts of life will remain unresolved. Peace becomes independent of answers. In this acceptance, a quiet stability forms. You are no longer chasing closure as if it were hidden somewhere outside you. You realize it has been available within all along. Calm replaces restlessness. You walk forward carrying both the memory and the release, not because the story concluded neatly, but because you decided it no longer needs to continue. The past loosens its hold, and in that release, you discover that life does not require perfect endings to move forward. It only asks that you keep moving, keep breathing, keep allowing new chapters to begin, even when the previous one faded without explanation. You are no longer waiting for answers. You are living beyond the question. In that quiet continuation, surrender reveals another gentle truth. Sometimes, closure is simply the moment you stop needing the door to reopen and start walking toward the light that was already ahead of you. As the need for answers loosens and you step forward without demanding explanations from the past, another quiet realization begins to take shape. Not every obstacle must be pushed through, and not every closed door must be forced open. There is a different kind of power that appears when you stop trying to break resistance and instead learn to move with it. After learning to live without certainty, the heart becomes ready to understand something even deeper. A surprising truth begins to unfold. What if strength was never meant to feel hard? For most of life, force is praised. You are taught to fight for what you want, to push through discomfort, to prove your determination by how much pressure you can apply. Effort becomes the measure of seriousness. Struggle becomes a badge of honor. Yet this constant pushing creates tension not only in the body, but in the spirit. You begin to associate progress with exhaustion. Yielding offers a different path. Softness is often misunderstood as weakness because it does not create noise. It does not demand attention. It does not insist on being seen. Yet in nature, the most enduring forms are not rigid, but flexible. Water flows around obstacles and eventually shapes stone. Wind bends trees that would otherwise snap. The soft survives where the hard breaks. Adaptability becomes the true form of resilience. Yielding does not mean surrendering your values or abandoning your intentions. It means adjusting your approach when resistance makes force ineffective. It is the wisdom of stepping aside when confrontation would only create more conflict. It is the awareness that timing matters as much as effort. Movement can be gentle and still be purposeful. In relationships, this softness can transform communication. Instead of escalating arguments by insisting on being right, you allow space for emotions to settle. Instead of defending every point, you listen for what is beneath the words. Yielding reduces tension because it removes the need to dominate. Understanding replaces victory. This approach also protects your energy. Force consumes resources quickly, leaving you drained even when you succeed. Yielding conserves energy, allowing you to remain steady over long periods. It is not about immediate results, but sustainable movement. Endurance comes from balance, not intensity. There is also dignity in choosing peace over proving strength. When you no longer need to win every confrontation, you free yourself from unnecessary battles. Your worth stops depending on dominance. You become selective about where you invest your effort. Discernment becomes a quiet shield. Softness allows emotional healing as well. When you stop fighting your own feelings, they begin to settle naturally. Resistance intensifies pain, while acceptance allows it to move through you. Yielding to your inner experience creates space for transformation. Compassion replaces self-judgment. Another aspect of this strength is patience. Force seeks immediate results, but many processes unfold slowly. Growth, trust, understanding, recovery, these require time. Yielding respects this timeline instead of trying to accelerate it. Time becomes an ally instead of an enemy. From a Buddhist perspective, yielding reflects non-attachment. When you are not clinging to a specific outcome, you can respond flexibly to changing conditions. You are not trapped by rigid expectations. You move like water, adjusting shape without losing essence. Freedom emerges from fluidity. This softness also deepens self-awareness. You begin to notice the impulse to push, to control, to dominate. Instead of acting on it automatically, you pause. In that pause, you choose a response that aligns with calm rather than urgency. Mindfulness interrupts habitual force. Yielding strengthens relationships because it invites cooperation instead of resistance. People are more willing to engage when they do not feel pressured. Your openness becomes a space where dialogue can happen without fear. Connection thrives in safety. There is humility in recognizing that you do not need to impose your will on every situation. Life continues moving even when you step back. Others contribute, circumstances evolve, solutions emerge collectively rather than individually. Shared effort replaces solitary struggle. Softness also encourages creativity. When you are not fixated on a single path, alternative possibilities become visible. You experiment, explore, adapt. Force narrows vision, yielding widens it. Innovation grows from openness. You may notice that yielding reduces internal conflict as well. The mind stops arguing with reality. Instead of insisting that things should be different, you work with what exists. This alignment reduces stress and creates a sense of flow. Harmony replaces friction. Yielding can feel uncomfortable at first because it challenges the identity built around toughness. You may fear being taken advantage of or appearing passive. But true softness includes boundaries. It is gentle without being submissive, flexible without being directionless. Strength becomes quiet and stable. This quiet strength is difficult to provoke because it does not rely on pride. Insults lose their power because you are not trying to defend an image. Pressure loses its urgency because you are not trying to prove anything. Calm becomes unshakable. Yielding also allows you to recover from setbacks more quickly. Instead of resisting what happened, you adjust. You learn from the experience without clinging to disappointment. Adaptation shortens the distance between failure and growth. Resilience becomes efficient. There is beauty in realizing that softness does not erase determination, it refines it. You still care deeply about what matters, but you pursue it with patience and awareness rather than aggression. Your energy becomes focused instead of scattered. Purpose moves steadily. From the perspective of surrender, yielding completes the movement away from control. You are no longer trying to force outcomes, rush processes, or impose certainty. You are participating in life's unfolding with sensitivity rather than dominance. Participation feels natural. You begin to trust that softness can carry you further than force ever did. Not because it eliminates challenges, but because it allows you to navigate them without breaking. Flexibility protects what rigidity cannot. As this understanding settles, your presence changes. Others feel less threatened around you. Conversations become calmer. Conflicts dissolve before they escalate. Your influence grows quietly, not through pressure but through steadiness. Peace becomes contagious. You also discover that yielding creates space for others to reveal their own strength. When you stop overpowering situations, hidden resources emerge. Cooperation replaces competition. Collective growth becomes possible. There is serenity in knowing that you do not need to fight constantly to exist with dignity. You can stand firm in your values while remaining gentle in your approach. This balance reflects maturity rather than weakness. Grace replaces strain. In nature, the cycle of yielding and returning is constant. Tides retreat before advancing again. Night falls before dawn. Rest follows effort. Recognizing this rhythm allows you to align with it instead of resisting it. Life becomes cyclical rather than linear. Yielding also deepens spiritual understanding. It reveals that control was never the source of safety. Connection was. When you soften, you reconnect with the flow of existence that was always supporting you. Trust replaces isolation. Over time, you realize that the strongest parts of your life were shaped not by force, but by persistence combined with gentleness. Relationships that endured, skills that matured, insights that deepened, all developed through steady care rather than pressure. Growth prefers nourishment to coercion. As you continue walking forward, softness becomes a companion rather than a strategy. You no longer switch between aggression and exhaustion. You remain centered, responsive, calm. Balance becomes your natural state, and in that balance, surrender reveals one of its deepest teachings. Yielding is not giving up. It is choosing a path that preserves your energy, your peace, and your humanity, while still allowing progress. Softness endures because it adapts. Force fades because it cannot. You move through life no longer as someone pushing against the current, but as someone carried by it, guiding your direction gently without trying to overpower the flow. In that gentle movement, strength becomes silent, steady, and lasting, a quiet power that does not need to announce itself because it is already woven into the way you live. As softness replaces force and you discover that yielding can carry you further than struggle ever did, another layer of surrender quietly unfolds, the willingness to move forward without needing to know what comes next. Even after learning to stop pushing, stop monitoring, stop demanding explanations, the mind may still cling to one final comfort: certainty. It wants reassurance that the path ahead is safe, predictable, mapped out. Yet life rarely offers that kind of clarity in advance. A deeper question begins to surface. What if uncertainty was never a problem but a guide? Not knowing can feel unsettling because the mind equates clarity with safety. When plans are precise and outcomes predictable, anxiety decreases. But this sense of control is often temporary. Circumstances shift, information changes, unexpected events appear. Certainty dissolves, revealing how fragile it was from the beginning. Uncertainty is not an interruption of life, it is its natural condition. Trusting uncertainty means recognizing that growth often happens in spaces where answers are not yet available. When everything is defined, there is little room for discovery. The unknown invites exploration, creativity, and adaptation. It pushes you to develop qualities that certainty would never require. Courage emerges when guarantees disappear. Many of the most meaningful transitions in life begin with not knowing. Starting a new path, leaving a familiar environment, forming a connection without predicting its future. These moments are uncomfortable precisely because they demand presence rather than prediction. Presence becomes more valuable than planning. Uncertainty also humbles the ego. It reminds you that knowledge has limits, that perception is partial, that control is incomplete. This humility creates openness to learning. Instead of assuming you understand everything, you become receptive to new perspectives. Wisdom grows from curiosity. There is intelligence in uncertainty because it prevents stagnation. When you cannot rely on fixed answers, you stay alert to changes. You adjust continuously. This flexibility strengthens resilience because you learn to respond rather than react. Adaptation becomes second nature. From a spiritual perspective, uncertainty dissolves attachment to outcomes. When the future is unclear, you focus more on how you move through the present. Your attention shifts from destination to direction, from results to intentions. Meaning is found in the journey. Trusting not knowing also reduces pressure. You no longer expect yourself to have every solution immediately. You allow time for understanding to unfold. This patience prevents impulsive decisions driven by fear of ambiguity. Stillness becomes a source of clarity. There is also freedom in admitting that you do not need to understand everything to move forward. Action can coexist with uncertainty. You take steps guided by values rather than by guarantees. Each step reveals new information that was not available before. Progress becomes experiential rather than theoretical. Uncertainty deepens intuition because it forces you to listen inward. Without external maps, you rely on subtle signals, feelings of alignment, tension, curiosity. This sensitivity strengthens self-trust. Inner guidance becomes more audible. Relationships are transformed by this openness as well. You stop trying to define every connection immediately. You allow people to reveal themselves gradually. Conversations become explorations instead of negotiations. Connection grows organically. Trusting uncertainty also makes you more compassionate toward others. Everyone is navigating unknowns, even if they appear confident. Recognizing this shared vulnerability reduces judgment and increases empathy. Understanding replaces comparison. There is relief in realizing that not knowing is not failure. It is an honest reflection of reality's complexity. Pretending certainty often creates more confusion than admitting ambiguity. Honesty restores integrity. Creativity flourishes in uncertain environments because constraints loosen. When outcomes are not predetermined, imagination fills the space. You consider possibilities that would have been dismissed under rigid expectations. Innovation thrives on openness. You may notice that anxiety decreases when you stop fighting uncertainty. Resistance amplifies fear, while acceptance reduces it. You begin to see unpredictability as a dynamic element rather than a threat. Calm grows from acceptance. Trusting uncertainty also aligns you with the natural rhythm of existence. Seasons change without announcing precise timelines. Weather shifts without explanation. Life itself unfolds without a script visible to those living it. You are part of this unfolding. There is a quiet confidence that develops when you realize you have navigated uncertainty many times before. Every major decision in your life involved unknowns. Each time you learned, adapted, survived. Remembering this history strengthens trust in your capacity. Experience becomes reassurance. Uncertainty teaches patience because answers often arrive gradually. Insight appears through reflection, conversation, or time. When you stop demanding immediate clarity, you become more attentive to subtle guidance. Awareness sharpens over time. From the perspective of surrender, not knowing becomes a teacher because it exposes attachments. It shows where you cling to control, where fear hides behind the need for certainty. By observing these patterns, you loosen them. Freedom follows recognition. You also discover that uncertainty contains possibility. When the future is not fixed, transformation remains available. New paths can emerge, unexpected opportunities can appear, identities can evolve. Hope lives in openness. Trusting this process requires faith, not blind optimism, but confidence in the unfolding of life itself. It is the belief that meaning can arise even when direction is unclear. Faith steadies the heart. Over time, you begin to experience uncertainty as spacious rather than constricting. It becomes a field of potential rather than a void of danger. This shift transforms fear into curiosity. Curiosity energizes exploration. There is also humility in accepting that certainty is often an illusion. Even the most detailed plans cannot account for every variable. Recognizing this prevents disappointment when things change. Flexibility replaces rigidity. Uncertainty invites collaboration as well. When you admit you do not have all the answers, you become open to input from others. Collective insight often reveals solutions that individual effort could not produce. Community strengthens resilience. Trusting not knowing also deepens appreciation for the present. Without a fixed future to cling to, each moment becomes more vivid. You engage fully with what is happening now because it is the only reality available. Presence becomes grounding. You may find that letting go of certainty restores playfulness. Exploration feels less risky when you accept that mistakes are part of learning. You experiment without needing perfection. Play nurtures growth. In this openness, surrender reveals another truth. Uncertainty is not empty. It is alive with possibilities. It invites participation rather than control, curiosity rather than fear. Life becomes a conversation instead of a command. As you continue forward, you notice that not knowing does not weaken you. It makes you attentive, adaptable, receptive. These qualities are far more sustainable than rigid certainty. Strength becomes fluid, and in that fluidity, peace settles quietly. You are no longer waiting for clarity before allowing yourself to rest. You trust that understanding will come when it is needed, not before. Rest becomes unconditional. You walk through life guided by awareness rather than guarantees, open to surprise, grounded in values, willing to learn from whatever unfolds. You are no longer afraid of the unknown, but you are listening to it. In that listening, uncertainty reveals itself not as darkness, but as a vast horizon, one that expands your vision, deepens your wisdom, and reminds you that the path is created by walking, not by knowing exactly where it leads. And in that quiet trust, surrender becomes complete enough for peace to remain, even when answers do not. As uncertainty becomes less frightening and you learn to walk forward without needing guarantees, another hidden habit begins to loosen: the urge to prove yourself in every situation. Even when you accept not knowing, there can still be a quiet pressure to be right, to defend your position, to come out on top, so that uncertainty does not feel like weakness. The mind searches for small victories to restore its sense of control. A revealing question rises here. How much of your tension comes from battles that never needed to be fought? The desire to win is deeply rooted. From childhood, you are taught to compete, to compare, to measure success by whether you came out ahead. This mindset can be useful in certain contexts, but when it extends into every conversation, every disagreement, every misunderstanding, it transforms daily life into a series of contests. Peace becomes impossible when everything is a competition. Winning often brings temporary satisfaction, but leaves subtle consequences. Relationships can strain because the other person feels diminished. Conversations turn into debates instead of exchanges. You may succeed in proving a point, but lose closeness, trust, or mutual respect. Victory without connection feels hollow. There is also exhaustion in constantly preparing arguments, defending opinions, anticipating criticism. The mind stays alert for threats to identity, as if disagreement were an attack rather than a difference in perspective. Defensiveness drains emotional energy. Releasing the need to win begins with recognizing that not all situations require resolution. Some disagreements reflect different experiences rather than errors that must be corrected. Allowing those differences to exist without forcing agreement reduces tension immediately. Acceptance replaces persuasion. Choosing peace over victory does not mean abandoning your values. It means prioritizing harmony when the outcome of the conflict will not change what truly matters. You learn to ask whether being right will improve the situation or simply satisfy pride. Discernment guides response. Many arguments escalate because both sides seek validation rather than understanding. When you step out of that pattern, the dynamic changes. The conversation loses its competitive edge and becomes an opportunity to learn instead of dominate. Curiosity softens confrontation. There is humility in admitting that you may not have the full picture. Even strong convictions benefit from openness to new information. This humility reduces the urgency to win because it acknowledges that understanding evolves. Wisdom grows through flexibility. Letting go of victory also protects your inner calm. When your peace does not depend on outcomes, disagreements lose their emotional charge. You can listen without feeling threatened, speak without aggression, and walk away without resentment. Stability becomes internal. From a Buddhist perspective, attachment to winning is another form of clinging to identity, reputation, control. Releasing it frees the mind from cycles of comparison and competition. Contentment replaces rivalry. Choosing peace also strengthens relationships because it demonstrates respect. Others feel heard rather than defeated. This respect encourages openness and reduces the likelihood of future conflict. Trust grows where pride recedes. You may notice that when you stop trying to win, conversations become more meaningful. Without the need to defend, you can explore ideas together. Solutions often emerge naturally when both sides feel safe. Collaboration replaces opposition. Releasing victory reduces regret as well. Words spoken in the heat of argument often linger long after the disagreement ends. By stepping back before escalation, you prevent damage that cannot easily be repaired. Restraint preserves dignity. There is also freedom in allowing misunderstandings to exist without correcting them immediately. Not everyone needs to see you accurately for your life to remain meaningful. Trying to control perception creates unnecessary stress. Authenticity does not require approval. Choosing peace can feel unfamiliar at first because it challenges the identity built around strength. Society often equates assertiveness with dominance, yet true strength includes the ability to step back when conflict serves no purpose. Maturity expresses itself through restraint. You begin to recognize that some battles are distractions from what truly matters. Time and energy spent proving small points could be directed toward growth, creativity, or connection. Focus shifts toward meaning. Letting go of victory also dissolves the fear of losing. When you are not invested in winning, you are free to participate without anxiety. Failure becomes information rather than humiliation. Confidence grows without comparison. There is serenity in understanding that your worth does not increase with every win or decrease with every loss. Identity becomes independent of outcomes. Self-respect replaces validation. As this perspective deepens, compassion expands. You see that others are also driven by their need to be heard, to feel significant, to protect their identity. Recognizing this reduces judgment and fosters empathy. Empathy transforms conflict. You may also discover that peace has a subtle influence. When you remain calm in situations that typically escalate, others often mirror that calm. Your restraint becomes an invitation for harmony. Presence shapes atmosphere. Choosing peace over victory aligns with surrender because it acknowledges that control over others' opinions or behavior is limited. You focus on your response rather than their reaction. Responsibility returns to where it belongs. This shift reduces the emotional cost of interaction. Conversations become less draining because they no longer carry the weight of proving something. You engage for understanding, not validation. Interaction becomes lighter. Releasing the need to win also opens space for forgiveness. When pride softens, grudges lose their foundation. You become willing to let go of past conflicts that once defined your relationships. Forgiveness restores freedom. From a broader perspective, life itself is not a contest. It is a series of experiences that shape awareness. Measuring each moment by whether you prevailed obscures the richness of simply participating. Participation becomes the true reward. You may find that peace feels more satisfying than victory ever did. It brings a quiet contentment that does not depend on comparison or recognition. This contentment endures beyond the moment. Calm becomes the new success. Over time, the habit of competition fades. You respond thoughtfully rather than reflexively. You choose silence when words would inflame. You choose understanding when judgment would divide. Grace replaces aggression. In this way, surrender continues deepening. You are no longer trying to control outcomes, perceptions, uncertainty, or interactions. You are allowing life to unfold without constant defense. Peace becomes a steady companion. You walk through disagreements without losing yourself, through conflicts without carrying bitterness, through misunderstandings without needing resolution at any cost. Your energy remains intact. And in that preserved energy, you discover something profound. Choosing peace is not passive. It is an active decision to protect what is most valuable within you. Victory fades, peace remains. You are no longer measuring life by who won or lost. You are living it with a quiet strength that does not need proof, a calm that does not require dominance, and a wisdom that understands that some of the greatest triumphs are the battles you chose not to fight. In that quiet triumph, surrender reveals another gift, the freedom to walk away from conflict with your dignity, your energy, and your peace still whole. As the need to win fades and peace becomes more valuable than proving a point, another exhausting pattern becomes visible, the silent struggle that continues even when no words are spoken. You may no longer be arguing outwardly, yet inside there is still resistance, still tension, still a pull between what is and what you wish were different. The battle has simply moved inward, where it drains you quietly. A tender realization begins to surface. What if the pain continues because you are still holding on to the rope? Emotional tug-of-war happens whenever you fight reality from the inside. You replay conversations, resist feelings, hold on to expectations that are no longer possible. Part of you wants to let go, but another part keeps pulling, believing that effort will somehow change what has already happened. Struggle continues because resistance remains. Dropping the rope is not defeat. It is the decision to stop engaging in a battle that has no winner. When two sides pull endlessly, both become exhausted. Letting go ends the tension immediately, not because the problem disappears, but because the struggle stops feeding it. Peace begins where resistance ends. Many emotional conflicts persist because they are fueled by attachment. Attachment to how things should have been, how someone should have behaved, how life should have unfolded. The mind clings to an alternate version of reality, refusing to accept the present one. Acceptance dissolves imaginary battles. Letting go requires courage because it feels like giving up control. You may fear that if you stop pulling, you will lose something important, your dignity, your hopes, your sense of justice. But often what you lose is only the illusion that you can rewrite the past. Freedom replaces illusion. Emotional tug-of-war also happens in relationships when both sides try to change each other. Each person pulls in their own direction, hoping the other will yield first. The tension builds until connection becomes strained. Understanding emerges when pulling stops. Dropping the rope in this context means allowing others to be as they are, even if you disagree. It does not mean approving harmful behavior. It means recognizing that forcing change rarely produces genuine transformation. Influence grows through patience, not pressure. Internally, this surrender softens self-conflict as well. You stop fighting parts of yourself that feel uncomfortable, anger, sadness, fear. Instead of trying to eliminate them, you allow them to exist without acting on them. This reduces their intensity naturally. Emotions settle when not resisted. There is also relief in acknowledging that you cannot control how others feel about you. Trying to manage their perceptions keeps you trapped in invisible tension. Releasing that responsibility allows you to breathe again. Authenticity replaces performance. Dropping the rope frees attention for what you can influence: your actions, your responses, your direction. Energy that was trapped in resistance becomes available for growth. Energy flows where struggle stops. From a Buddhist perspective, this is the practice of non-clinging. Suffering arises when you grasp tightly at experiences, identities, or expectations. Letting go does not erase what happened. It removes the friction between reality and desire. Harmony replaces friction. You may notice that peace feels unfamiliar at first. Without the tension you have grown accustomed to, there is a quiet emptiness. This emptiness is not loss, it is space. Space for healing, creativity, and new possibilities. Space invites renewal. There is wisdom in realizing that not every emotion needs resolution. Some feelings fade simply because time passes and attention shifts. Intervening constantly can prolong what would otherwise dissolve naturally. Patience allows natural release. Dropping the rope also protects your mental clarity. When you are not consumed by internal battles, your thinking becomes more focused. Decisions feel simpler because they are not distorted by emotional noise. Clarity returns with calm. Relationships improve as well. When you stop reacting defensively, others feel less compelled to escalate. Conflicts that once repeated lose momentum because the cycle of reaction has been interrupted. Peace becomes contagious. You may also discover that forgiveness becomes easier. Holding on to resentment requires continuous effort, like maintaining tension on the rope. Letting go releases both you and the other person from that strain. Forgiveness restores lightness. There is dignity in stepping away from situations that drain you. You do not need to participate in every emotional struggle presented to you. Silence can be a powerful form of disengagement. Boundaries protect peace. Dropping the rope does not mean suppressing your voice. It means choosing when expression serves understanding and when it only fuels conflict. This discernment prevents unnecessary pain. Wisdom guides communication. You begin to trust that life will continue moving even when you stop forcing outcomes. Problems that seemed overwhelming often shrink when you stop feeding them with attention. Perspective widens through distance. This surrender also deepens self-respect. You show yourself that your peace matters more than being right, more than being understood immediately, more than holding on to grievances. Inner security grows. Over time, the habit of struggle weakens. You notice tension sooner and release it faster. Emotional recovery becomes quicker because you no longer cling to the conflict. Resilience becomes effortless. From the path of surrender, dropping the rope is a turning point. It marks the shift from fighting life to flowing with it. You stop measuring strength by how much pressure you can withstand, and start measuring it by how easily you can release. Soft strength replaces rigid endurance. There is also joy in discovering how much lighter life feels without constant resistance. Moments that once felt heavy become manageable. You move through experiences instead of getting stuck in them. Lightness becomes natural. You realize that peace was never hidden, it was simply buried under layers of struggle. Removing those layers reveals what was always there. Calm was waiting beneath tension. As this understanding settles, you become less reactive to triggers that once consumed you. Words, actions, or memories that used to pull you into conflict lose their grip. Freedom replaces reactivity. You walk through situations with a sense of spaciousness, aware that you can engage without becoming entangled. This awareness creates a buffer between stimulus and response. Choice replaces impulse. In that space, compassion arises naturally, for yourself and for others who are still pulling their ropes, unaware that they can let go. You recognize the shared human struggle and respond with patience rather than judgment. Empathy softens perception. And in this quiet compassion, surrender reveals another truth. You do not need to resolve every tension to live peacefully. You only need to stop feeding it. The battle ends when participation ends. You are no longer pulled in every direction by emotions, expectations, or memories. You stand steady, not because life is calm, but because you have stopped fighting its currents. Stability replaces struggle. In that steadiness, a profound relief emerges, the relief of realizing that peace was never about winning the tug-of-war. It was about putting the rope down and walking away with your energy intact. You are no longer exhausted, you are free. And in that freedom, surrender becomes complete enough for joy to return quietly, without effort, without struggle, simply because nothing is pulling against it anymore. As the rope falls from your hands and the struggle finally quiets, another layer of tension becomes visible, not in your relationships, not in your circumstances, but inside your own mind. Even when you stop fighting life externally, thoughts can continue pulling you back into conflict. They replay old scenes, predict future problems, judge your actions, question your worth. The noise does not come from the world anymore, it comes from within. A subtle discovery begins here. What if the mind is loud, not because it is wise, but because it is used to being obeyed? Thoughts often present themselves as commands rather than suggestions. They tell you to worry, to doubt, to react, to defend. Because they appear automatically, it is easy to assume they are true or necessary. But many thoughts are simply echoes of past experiences, fears, or habits. They arise without intention and disappear if not fed. Not every thought deserves your attention. Watching thoughts without obeying them creates distance between awareness and reaction. Instead of being swept away by every idea that appears, you observe it as you would watch clouds moving across the sky. Some are dark, some are light, but none are permanent. Awareness becomes the stable ground beneath mental weather. Mental control loops form when thoughts trigger emotions, emotions trigger more thoughts, and the cycle repeats. Worry leads to more worry. Self-criticism leads to more self-criticism. The loop continues because it is reinforced by attention. Attention fuels repetition. Breaking this cycle begins with noticing without participating. When a negative thought arises, you acknowledge it without following it to its conclusion. You let it pass instead of arguing with it or believing it. Silence interrupts the pattern. This practice does not eliminate thoughts. It changes your relationship with them. You stop treating them as instructions and start seeing them as mental events. Just as a sound can occur without demanding action, a thought can appear without controlling behavior. Freedom grows through observation. There is relief in realizing that you are not the content of your mind. You are the awareness in which thoughts appear. This shift transforms identity from something fragile to something spacious. You become the observer, not the storm. Watching thoughts also reveals how repetitive they are. The same concerns return in different forms, as if the mind is trying to solve problems that cannot be resolved through thinking alone. Recognizing this repetition reduces its authority. Familiarity weakens illusion. From a Buddhist perspective, this practice is called mindfulness, observing the mind without attachment. It teaches that thoughts are not enemies to defeat, but movements to witness. Resistance creates tension, while observation creates calm. Acceptance dissolves conflict. You may notice that some thoughts lose intensity when seen clearly. Fearful predictions seem less convincing when you recognize them as possibilities rather than certainties. Self-critical voices soften when you stop identifying with them. Clarity weakens distortion. Watching thoughts also improves emotional regulation. Instead of reacting immediately, you pause. In that pause, you choose a response aligned with your values rather than with impulse. Choice replaces compulsion. This space between thought and action is where freedom lives. Without it, behavior becomes automatic. With it, you regain control over how you move through the world. Awareness restores agency. Mental stillness becomes possible when you stop feeding every idea. Periods of quiet appear between thoughts, like gaps between waves. In these gaps, peace emerges naturally. Stillness was always available. You may also discover that creativity arises from this quiet. Without constant mental noise, subtle insights surface. Solutions appear effortlessly because the mind is not crowded with unnecessary chatter. Silence nurtures innovation. Watching thoughts without obeying them strengthens patience. Urges to act immediately lose their urgency. You can wait, reflect, and respond deliberately. Deliberation replaces haste. This practice also reduces anxiety. When you stop engaging with catastrophic predictions, the nervous system calms. You realize that many fears were sustained by imagination rather than by reality. Calm spreads through the body. Relationships improve because you are less reactive. Words that once triggered defensiveness now pass without pulling you into argument. You listen more deeply because your mind is not preparing counterpoints. Presence replaces anticipation. Self-compassion grows as well. When harsh thoughts arise, you observe them without endorsing them. This prevents internal criticism from defining your self-image. Kindness becomes internal. Over time, you trust your ability to navigate mental storms without being overwhelmed. Thoughts lose their power to dictate your mood or direction. Stability becomes natural. Watching thoughts also deepens your connection to the present moment. Instead of living inside narratives about the past or future, you experience what is actually happening now. Reality replaces imagination. You begin to see that thinking is a tool, not a master. It serves you when used intentionally and drains you when allowed to run unchecked. Balance replaces excess. This understanding transforms how you approach challenges. You think when thinking is useful and rest when it is not. You no longer equate constant analysis with responsibility. Wisdom guides effort. From the path of surrender, observing thoughts without obeying them is the final release of control at the mental level. You stop trying to control outcomes externally and stop being controlled internally. Freedom becomes complete. You walk through life with a quiet mind, aware but not overwhelmed, engaged but not entangled. Thoughts come and go without disturbing the deeper calm beneath. Peace becomes your baseline. In that calm, you discover a profound truth. The mind was never meant to dominate your life. It was meant to assist your awareness, not replace it. You are larger than your thinking, and in that recognition, surrender reveals one of its most liberating gifts. The ability to live without being trapped in mental loops, to act without being driven by fear, to rest without being chased by unfinished thoughts. And in that recognition, surrender reveals one of its most liberating gifts. The ability to live without being trapped in mental loops, to act without being driven by fear, to rest without being chased by unfinished thoughts. You are no longer pulled by every idea that appears. You are watching, choosing, and living with clarity. In that clarity, peace settles not as a fragile state, but as a stable presence, untouched by the noise that once defined your inner world. As the mind grows quieter and thoughts lose their power to command your actions, a new question gently emerges. If you are no longer driven by fear, pressure, or constant mental noise, how do you move through life at all? Without anxiety pushing you forward or attachment pulling you toward outcomes, what becomes the source of action? A surprising realization waits here. Effort does not have to come from tension. There is a way of acting that feels steady instead of strained, focused instead of frantic. It is the kind of effort that flows from clarity rather than from desperation. When you stop forcing results and stop resisting uncertainty, your actions begin to align naturally with the moment in front of you. Movement becomes simple again. Effortless effort does not mean doing nothing. It means doing what is needed without carrying the extra weight of worry about how everything will turn out. You give your full attention to the task itself rather than splitting your energy between action and anxiety. Presence sharpens effectiveness. Much of the exhaustion people feel comes from trying to control both the process and the outcome at the same time. You act while simultaneously monitoring whether your action will succeed. This double effort creates tension that drains vitality. Releasing the outcome restores energy. When you act without clinging to results, you discover a lighter form of commitment. You still care deeply about what you are doing, but your sense of worth is not tied to how it ends. Success brings gratitude, failure brings learning, and neither defines you completely. Stability replaces emotional swings. From a Buddhist perspective, this is the balance between intention and attachment. You set a direction based on values and compassion, then allow reality to shape the outcome. You participate fully without demanding control. Participation becomes the goal. Effortless effort also requires trust. Trust that sincere action has meaning even when results are uncertain. This trust removes the fear that paralyzes many decisions. You move forward because the step itself matters. Courage grows from acceptance. There is a calm confidence in working this way. You are not rushing, not hesitating, simply responding to what is present. Each action feels complete because it is not burdened by expectation. Completion exists in the doing. You may notice that creativity improves when attachment fades. Without the pressure to produce a perfect outcome, experimentation becomes possible. Mistakes transform into discoveries rather than disappointments. Freedom nurtures innovation. Effortless effort also deepens concentration. When attention is not divided by worry, you become absorbed in the task. Time seems to pass differently because you are fully engaged. Focus becomes natural. This state is often described as flow, a condition where action and awareness merge. In flow there is effort, but it feels smooth rather than forced. You are neither pushing nor holding back. Harmony replaces struggle. Acting without clinging also reduces fear of failure. When results are not tied to identity, setbacks lose their sting. You adjust your approach instead of questioning your worth. Resilience strengthens quietly. Relationships benefit from this approach as well. You offer kindness without expecting specific responses. Communicate honestly without demanding agreement. Support others without trying to control their journey. Generosity becomes unconditional. Effortless effort aligns with surrender because it respects the limits of control. You do what you can and release what you cannot influence. This balance prevents burnout and regret. Peace accompanies productivity. You may also discover that motivation becomes more sustainable. When action is driven by intrinsic meaning rather than external reward, it does not fluctuate as wildly. You continue because the work itself feels worthwhile. Purpose replaces pressure. Acting fully without attachment also encourages patience. You allow processes to unfold at their natural pace instead of forcing acceleration. This patience improves outcomes because it respects timing. Timing becomes an ally. There is humility in acknowledging that you cannot foresee all consequences. By releasing the need for certainty, you remain open to adjustments. Flexibility becomes a strength rather than a compromise. Adaptability ensures progress. Effortless effort transforms how you approach challenges. Instead of reacting with frustration, you respond with curiosity. Obstacles become information rather than barriers. Learning replaces resistance. You begin to notice that life itself operates through this principle. Nature grows without hurry, yet achieves everything. Seasons change without forcing themselves. Rivers flow without striving. You are part of the same rhythm. Acting in harmony with this rhythm reduces internal conflict. You stop comparing your pace to others and focus on what is appropriate for your path. This comparison-free approach protects your peace. Contentment replaces urgency. Effortless effort also clarifies priorities. When you are not chasing every possible outcome, you choose actions that align with what truly matters. This selectivity prevents dispersion of energy. Clarity guides commitment. There is also joy in experiencing action as expression rather than obligation. You work, create, or help others not to prove something, but to share what is alive within you. Expression becomes fulfillment. This way of living dissolves the illusion that peace and productivity are opposites. You can be deeply active while remaining calm. You can strive without strain. Balance becomes sustainable. Over time, your relationship with effort transforms. You no longer measure dedication by how much you suffer. Instead, you recognize that ease can coexist with discipline. Ease becomes strength. Effortless effort also nurtures gratitude. When you focus on the process rather than the result, you appreciate small moments of progress. Each step feels meaningful. Gratitude enriches experience. You may find that letting go of results makes achievements more satisfying, not less. Because you are not obsessing over them, their arrival feels like a gift rather than a necessity. Joy replaces relief. From the path of surrender, this paradox reveals the deepest freedom. You can act wholeheartedly while remaining emotionally unbound. You engage with life fully without becoming trapped by it. Engagement becomes liberation. In this state, peace and action no longer conflict. You move with clarity, rest without guilt, contribute without exhaustion. Your energy circulates instead of depleting. Vitality becomes steady. You walk through life participating rather than controlling, creating rather than forcing, responding rather than resisting. The future remains open, but the present feels complete. Completeness exists in each moment, and in that completeness, surrender reaches a quiet fulfillment. You are no longer trying to control outcomes, silence thoughts, win battles, or hold on to certainty. You are simply acting from awareness, allowing results to unfold as they will. Effort becomes an offering instead of a demand. In that offering, life feels lighter yet more meaningful, calmer yet more alive. You realize that the deepest power was never in forcing reality to obey you, but in aligning yourself with the natural flow that was always carrying you forward. You are no longer pushing the river, you are moving with it. And in that movement, peace and purpose become inseparable, each supporting the other without tension, without fear, without the need to grasp, just steady, quiet participation in the unfolding of your life. You spent your life trying to hold everything together, trying to predict every turn, trying to force peace out of chaos, and all it did was exhaust you. Tonight, you saw a different path. Not the path of giving up, but the path of letting go. The quiet strength of allowing life to move without gripping it so tightly. The courage to release timelines, outcomes, opinions, and the endless pressure to control what was never yours to control in the first place. Because peace was never hiding in perfect plans. It was waiting in surrender. When you stop trying to control the river, you finally feel the water carrying you. When you stop forcing doors open, you notice the ones already open behind you. When you stop fighting uncertainty, it turns into space. Space to breathe, to heal, to live without fear of what comes next. This is not weakness, this is freedom. If something inside you softened tonight, if you felt even a small weight lift off your chest, write, "I release control," in the comments. Not for me, for yourself. A quiet promise that you are done wrestling with life and ready to move with it. And if this message found you at the exact moment you needed it, subscribe to the channel so you don't walk this path alone. There are more lessons ahead that will calm your mind, steady your heart, and remind you who you are beneath the noise. Let go. Breathe. Trust the unfolding. Your peace is not in the outcome, it is in the surrender.